She was falling in love with a man who didn't exist. Not because he was a ghost, not because he was lying about his name, his past, or the way he looked at her across a diner table like she was the only person in the room. He was lying about everything else. The worn boots, the beat-up truck, the project manager title he gave every woman who asked what he did for a living. Grayson Pierce had built a billion-dollar empire with his bare hands, and then spent 3 years hiding it inside a pair of faded jeans. The question was never whether Lily Carter would find out. The question was what she would do when she did. Drop a like and comment your city below, and I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's begin. The alarm on Grayson Pierce's phone went off at 5:14 in the morning, same as it did every day, and he silenced it before it could wake Sophie. He lay there for a moment in the dark, staring at the ceiling of a bedroom that cost more to furnish than most people made in a year, and felt, as he often did in those quiet minutes before the world demanded things of him, completely alone. Not lonely. He'd stopped confusing those two things a while back. Lonely was a feeling you could fix with a phone call, or a dinner reservation, or a woman who said the right things at the right moments. Alone was different. Alone was structural. It lived in the bones of a life and didn't move no matter how much money you threw at the walls around it. He got up, put on coffee, stood at the kitchen window and watched the sky go from black to the particular shade of gray-blue that preceded sunrise in the city. And he drank his coffee black because he'd never bothered to learn what he actually liked in it. There were 1,000 small preferences Grayson Pierce had never developed, because for most of his adult life, someone had always been there to develop them for him. His phone buzzed on the counter. A message from his COO, Daniel Marsh. Infrastructure meeting moved to 7. Hargrove project bids due by noon. Also, your sister called the office again. He set the phone face down and finished his coffee. At 5:47, a small voice came from down the hall. "Daddy!" He turned. Sophie was standing in the kitchen doorway in her dinosaur pajamas, the ones with the fraying cuffs she refused to let him throw away, her dark hair pressed flat on one side from her pillow. She was 8 years old and she had her mother's eyes and his stubborn chin, and looking at her sometimes made something in his chest do a complicated thing he didn't have language for. "You're up early," he said. "You always make the coffee smell loud," she said. She climbed onto the bar stool at the kitchen island and pulled his half-empty mug toward her and stared into it like it had answers. "Can I have some?" "No." "What if I just smell it?" "That's what you're doing now." She considered this. "Fair." He made her a mug of warm milk with a half-teaspoon of the coffee, exactly the way he'd been making it since she was 6 and started asking. And she wrapped both hands around it and drank it with the seriousness of a woman who'd earned it. This was the truest part of his day, before the calls and the meetings and the decisions that affected hundreds of people who would never know his name, before Daniel and the bids and whatever his sister wanted this time, before he had to be Grayson Pierce, founder and CEO of Pierce Construction Group, the company he'd built from a 3-man crew and a leased backhoe into one of the most successful mid-market construction firms in the Southeast. Before all of that, he was just Sophie's dad, making coffee in the dark. He'd learned to protect that. The disguise hadn't started as a plan. 3 years ago, when the marriage had finally finished collapsing in the way that marriages do, not with a single explosion, but with a long series of small failures that accumulated like sediment until the weight of them was impossible to ignore, Grayson had found himself back in the world of dating at 32, wealthier than he'd ever expected to be and more cautious than he'd ever thought necessary. His friend Marcus had set him up on his first post-divorce date, a woman named Courtney, attractive and polished, who worked in commercial real estate. The date had gone fine. Pleasant conversation, decent restaurant, mutual interest, right up until the moment she'd Googled him in the bathroom and come back to the table a different person. The shift was subtle, but Grayson was good at reading rooms. He'd been reading rooms since he was a teenager working construction summers for his uncle, learning how to tell whether a client was satisfied or just being polite, whether a subcontractor was hiding a problem or genuinely couldn't see it. Courtney came back from the bathroom and her posture changed. Her questions changed. The warmth in her voice acquired a quality he could only describe as deliberate, like she was now performing warmth rather than feeling it. She mentioned her apartment lease twice. She talked about a charity gala she'd been meaning to attend. By the end of the evening, she was laughing at things that weren't funny. He drove home alone and sat in his driveway for 10 minutes before going inside. The second date was the same. And the third, different women, same pattern. That moment of discovery, that almost imperceptible recalibration of interest. He didn't blame them, exactly. He understood that wealth was a real thing in the world, and that people responded to it rationally. But he was tired of wondering every time a woman smiled at him across a table, whether she was smiling at him or at the number attached to his name. So he tried something. On the fourth date, a woman named Angela, arranged through the same matchmaking service his sister had pushed him to join. He didn't correct anyone's assumptions. He wore jeans and a flannel shirt. He drove the old F-150 he kept in the back of his personal garage, a truck he'd bought in his early 20s when he was still doing manual work himself, back when Pierce Construction was a name spray-painted on the door of a van. He described himself as a project manager, which wasn't even entirely wrong. He managed projects, just not the way Angela imagined. Angela wasn't interested. She was polite about it, but clear. She had standards, she said, not unkindly, about financial stability. He went home and felt something strange and quiet that took him a while to identify. Relief. Because the answer was clean. Because he knew. He kept the disguise. On the last Saturday of September, Grayson took Sophie to lunch. This was a ritual they'd maintained since the divorce. One weekend lunch every week, somewhere Sophie picked. No phones allowed except for emergencies. Sophie took the responsibility of selection seriously. She kept a running list in a purple notebook and rotated through her candidates with the strategic patience of someone who understood that good things required planning. This week she had chosen Lou's family restaurant on Clement Street. Grayson had never been there. He pulled the old F-150 into a spot half a block away, and Sophie jumped out before he'd finished parking, which she knew she wasn't supposed to do, and he was still locking the truck when she appeared at his side, tugging his hand toward the entrance. "The reviews say they have the best grilled cheese in the city," she informed him seriously. "You read restaurant reviews?" "I read all the reviews. I'm thorough, Daddy." He let her drag him inside. Lou's was the kind of place that smelled like butter and old wood and something faintly sweet he couldn't identify. Maybe pie, maybe just years of good cooking soaked into the walls. The tables were mismatched, the menus laminated and slightly sticky, the acoustics shaped by too many conversations stacked on top of each other over too many years. It was, objectively, a modest restaurant, the kind of place that succeeded not because of a concept, but because of consistency. Because the people who ran it cared whether the food was good. They sat at a table near the window. Sophie immediately began studying the menu with academic focus. Their server appeared a few minutes later. "Hey there. Welcome to Lou's. Can I start you two off with something to drink?" She was in her late 20s or early 30s, with dark hair pulled back in a practical knot, the kind of knot that was about function rather than style. She had flour on her forearm that she hadn't noticed, and a small ink stain on the side of her right hand that suggested she'd been writing something earlier. Her apron was the standard Lou's green, but she'd tied it differently than the other servers Grayson had noticed. Looser, with the knot at the side rather than the back, which was either a personal preference or indicated she'd been doing this long enough to have developed them. Her name tag said Lily. "I want the grilled cheese," Sophie said without looking up from the menu, "and a chocolate milk. And also, what does bisque mean? Because I want to know before I decide if I want it." Lily didn't blink at the pivot. "It's a kind of creamy soup, usually with seafood or tomato. Ours is tomato today." "Is it smooth or chunky?" "Very smooth, like velvet, almost." Sophie considered this with the gravity it deserved. "Does velvet taste good?" "The soup does." "Okay, I'll think about the bisque. The grilled cheese is a definite yes, though." "Excellent choice," Lily said, and her voice had a warmth in it that wasn't the mechanical warmth of service industry courtesy. It was something more like genuine amusement, the kind you couldn't fake without practice. "And for you?" Grayson ordered coffee and the turkey club and tried not to study her too obviously. He did study her, though. He was good at studying people without appearing to. Years of negotiating contracts and reading clients had taught him to absorb information at a conversational angle. Peripheral, low intensity, attentive without broadcasting the attention. Lily moved through the restaurant with the specific efficiency of someone who'd been doing this long enough to have internalized the choreography. She knew which tables needed attention before they signaled for it. She carried 3 plates when other servers carried 2. When the older couple at the corner table couldn't hear the specials, she didn't repeat them louder. She leaned in and slowed down, which was a small kindness and a smart one. But it was the moments with Sophie that Grayson noticed most. When she brought the grilled cheese, she set it down and said, without being asked, "It's hot on the inside even though the crust doesn't look it. Give it 2 minutes." Sophie looked up from her notebook. She'd started drawing something, and said, "How do you know I wouldn't just eat it right away?" "Because you're the kind of person who reads the whole menu before deciding," Lily said. "That tells me you're patient." Sophie stared at her. "That's very perceptive." "Thank you. I work on it." "Do you like working here?" The question landed without warning, the way Sophie's questions often did, direct and unmuffled by the social filters that adults spent decades installing. Grayson watched Lily's face to see if she'd deflect or perform. She did neither. "Some days yes, some days no," she said. "Today's a yes. It's quiet, and the soup came out right, and a kid just told me I was perceptive, which is new." Sophie beamed. Grayson looked at the window. They stayed longer than they usually did. Sophie ordered the bisque and ate it with the considered concentration of someone determined to have an informed opinion. She declared it smooth but meaningful. Lily, passing by with a coffee pot, overheard this and stopped. "Smooth but meaningful is the best thing anyone has ever said about that soup," she said. "I'm writing a review," Sophie said, "in my notebook. Do you want me to read it to you?" "Sophie," Grayson said. "It's fine," Lily said, pulling out the chair across from Sophie with an ease that suggested she either didn't worry much about breaking small social protocols or had learned that children didn't traffic in them anyway. She sat for exactly 45 seconds while Sophie read her 3 sentences of soup review in her best formal voice. Then she said it was the most comprehensive review she'd ever received, thanked Sophie sincerely, and went back to work. Grayson watched her go. He left a tip that was significantly larger than the bill. Not to impress anyone. There was nothing impressive about a man in a flannel shirt leaving cash on a table, just because it seemed right, and because Lou's was the kind of place that survived on the math of those small decisions. In the truck on the way home, Sophie said, "I liked her." "Yeah," Grayson said. "She talked to me like I was a person." "You are a person." "You know what I mean. Some adults talk to kids like we're furniture that might suddenly start talking and they don't know what to do about it." He glanced over at her. "Where do you get this stuff?" She shrugged. "I observe." He thought about the way Lily had sat down without asking permission and read the soup review with the gravity it deserved and then walked back to work like it was nothing. Because to her it probably was nothing, just a small moment on a Saturday shift. That was the thing about small moments. They didn't know they were going to matter. 3 weeks later, his sister called. Claire Pierce was 41 years old, lived in Austin with her husband and 2 teenage boys, and maintained what she described as a healthy interest in Grayson's personal life, which he would have described differently. "Marcus told me you canceled on the matchmaker again," she said, without preamble. "I rescheduled." "You've rescheduled 4 times." "I've been busy." "You're always busy. That's the problem, Gray. You've built this incredible thing and you're raising Sophie by yourself and you're doing fine. I know you're doing fine, but fine isn't Claire. The same as happy. It isn't. And Sophie needs to see you make room for something other than work and being her dad. She needs to see what it looks like when, Claire, I hear you." Silence on the line. "Do you actually hear me, or are you doing the thing where you say you hear me so I'll stop talking?" He rubbed the back of his neck. "A little of both." She sighed, not angry, more the sigh of someone who loves you and has been losing the same argument for a long time. "The matchmaker's name is Renee. She has someone she thinks would be a good fit. Can you just try? Wear the flannel shirt, drive the truck, do your whole thing. I don't care. Just go and talk to someone who isn't Daniel or a subcontractor or Sophie's teacher." "You think I don't talk to people?" "I think you talk at people and call it conversation." He didn't have a response to that, partly because it was unkind, mostly because it was accurate. Fine, he said. I'll call Renee. He called Renee. The meeting was arranged for a Thursday evening at a wine bar in the financial district. Neutral ground, Renee's preferred setting for what she called initial alignments, which was the kind of language Grayson found slightly absurd but didn't comment on. He wore the flannel shirt. He took the truck. He listed his occupation as project manager in construction on the intake form and checked the box that said prefers casual settings and left the asset disclosure section blank, which Renee had told him was his right and which he exercised without guilt. He arrived 5 minutes early, ordered a club soda, and sat at a high-top table near the back. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Hi. I think I'm your 7 o'clock. I'm running 2 minutes late. I'm sorry. The bus was slow. Lily. He stared at the name. He typed back. No problem. I'm at the table in the back. Club soda. A pause. Okay. I'll find you. He'd been on enough of these to know how the first minute usually went. The approach, the eye contact, the small performance of first impressions. He'd watched women work out in real time how they felt about a man in a flannel shirt meeting them at a wine bar where they probably expected something different. He watched the door. When she walked in, he recognized her before she recognized him. The dark hair was down now, falling past her shoulders. She was in a blue dress. Simple, not formal, the kind of dress that suggested she'd taken care with the choice but hadn't taken too long. Her eyes moved across the room with the practiced scan of someone accustomed to navigating crowded spaces. And then they found him, and she stopped walking for about half a second. He saw it happen, the small recalibration. He raised a hand in a minimal wave and she came toward him, and he stood up because his uncle had raised him to stand up. Hi, she said. Lily Carter. Grayson Pierce, he said. It's nice to meet you. She shook his hand, firm grip, brief. Not the soft handshake of someone uncertain, not the aggressive handshake of someone performing confidence. Just a handshake. Then she looked at him more carefully and frowned, the small frown of someone trying to locate a memory. Have we met? She said. He took a breath. He could say no. It would be easy. She hadn't placed him yet, and he could let it go and start clean. I came into Lou's restaurant a few weeks ago, he said. Saturday lunch. I was with my daughter. The frown cleared. Then something warm moved across her face. The genuine kind of warm, not the performed kind. The soup review, she said. The soup review. She sat down and laughed. A real laugh, slightly surprised by itself. She was great. She had an opinion about velvet texture. She has opinions about everything. How old is she? 8 going on 45. Lily folded her hands on the table and tilted her head slightly. You're a single dad? Yeah, 3 years now. He paused. You? No kids, no ex-husband. She shrugged. Just a failed attempt at a restaurant of my own, which kind of counts as a relationship in how much it hurt when it ended. That surprised him. He hadn't expected her to lead with that. Most people didn't lead with failures on blind dates. It was usually 15 minutes in before anyone admitted to anything real. What happened with the restaurant? He asked. She looked at him, measuring something. You actually want to know, she said. That's not just a date thing you're asking. I run a construction company, he said, close enough to true. I spend a lot of time thinking about why projects fail. I actually want to know. She picked up her water glass and turned it slowly. Bad location, she said. Good food, good staff, bad location, bad timing. We were 3 blocks from a major road construction project that rerouted foot traffic for almost a year. By the time it was done, we'd burned through our reserves. She set the glass down. I put every dollar I had into it, borrowed money from my parents. She stopped. It was 2 years ago, and it still feels like a bruise, if I'm being honest. Grayson nodded slowly. I'm sorry, he said. That's genuinely awful. Yeah, she exhaled. It was. But I'm not wallowing. I'm working at Lou's. I'm rebuilding. I have a plan. A small, self-deprecating smile. I just also apparently signed up for blind dates, which tells you where the plan currently stands. He smiled. You and me both. Tell me about being a project manager, she said. What does that actually mean day to day? And Grayson Pierce, who had directed the construction of half a dozen major commercial developments in the past 18 months, who had 53 full-time employees and a board of 2 and a legal team that charged more per hour than Lily probably made in a week, told her about managing timelines and subcontractors and the particular frustration of supply chain delays, all of which was true. He left out the part about owning all of it. The date lasted 2 hours and 40 minutes. He knew because he checked his phone when he got to the truck, not because he was tracking, but because Sophie's babysitter had a curfew, and he'd asked her to text if it was going past 9. And when he looked at his phone, he saw it was 9:43, and there were 2 texts from the sitter and one from Sophie herself that said, "Dad, are you on a good date? Because it's okay if you are." He texted Sophie back, "Go to sleep." Her response, "That's not an answer." He sat in the truck for a moment before starting it. The evening had been, he was trying to be precise about this, in the way he was precise about most things, genuinely good. Not performed well with no red flags good, which was the best he'd managed in 3 years of this. Actually good. The kind of good where time moved differently, where he'd said things he hadn't planned to say, and it hadn't felt like a mistake. Lily Carter talked about her failed restaurant the way an honest person talked about a wound, clearly, with detail, without catastrophizing it or dismissing it. She had a sense of humor that arrived unexpectedly after she'd established something real, rather than being deployed up front as a deflection. She asked questions that followed logically from his answers, which suggested she was actually listening rather than waiting for her turn. She hadn't Googled him. He could usually tell. He drove home through streets still wet from an afternoon rain, and thought about the way she'd said, "I'm not wallowing," like she needed to clarify that to herself as much as to him. He understood that feeling. They went out again the following Thursday. Grayson had suggested a small Italian place in the Mission District that he liked because the tables were close together and the food was good and the noise level required you to lean in when you talked, which he'd learned was useful on a second date for reasons he couldn't entirely explain. He wore the flannel shirt again. He drove the truck. He was aware, sitting across from Lily in the warm light of that restaurant, that the gap between what she believed about him and what was true was already significant enough to be a problem if he was honest about it, which he was, to himself, even when he wasn't being honest to her. She'd told him more about the restaurant over pasta. The name had been Carta, meaning menu in Italian, because she'd thought that was clever when she was 27, and she still thought it was clever but in a different way now, more wistful. She'd told him about her parents, who lived in Portland and were supportive in the way that parents who lend you money and don't mention it are supportive. She'd told him about her apartment on the 4th floor of a building where the elevator worked about 60% of the time. He told her about Sophie's school, about the science fair project Sophie was planning that involved what she described as a controlled gravitational experiment with eggs, about the way Sophie had started keeping a list of restaurants she wanted to review when she was old enough to have a food blog. "She sounds extraordinary," Lily said. "She's 8 and relentless, which I think is the same thing." "You talk about her differently than most single dads I've heard talk about their kids." He looked up from his food. "What do you mean?" "A lot of guys, not trying to generalize, but a lot of guys talk about their kids like proof of something. Like, look at me, I'm involved, I'm not the bad guy. You talk about her like she's just your favorite person." He thought about this. "Yeah," he said. "That's what she is." Lily nodded, and something about the way she nodded, not performatively, just quiet acknowledgement, made him look at her for a moment longer than was casual. "What?" she said. "Nothing," he said. "Just, you say what you actually think. Is that unusual?" He picked up his wine glass. "In my experience? Yes." She looked at him steadily. "Mine too." He told Daniel about her, which was the clearest sign that it mattered. Daniel Marsh had worked for Grayson for 6 years, which was long enough to have passed from employee into something closer to a trusted lieutenant, though neither of them would have used that word. He was methodical and unimpressed by things that didn't warrant impression, which was a quality Grayson valued more than almost anything. They were reviewing bid documents for the Hargrove project on a Tuesday morning when Grayson looked up from the numbers and said, "I went on a date last week, 2 dates." Daniel didn't look up from his papers. Same woman? Yeah. Good date or just fine? Good date. Daniel looked up then, studying him briefly. Does she know? No? A pause. You gonna tell her? Eventually. That's not really an answer, Gray. I know. Daniel looked back down at his papers. When is eventually? Grayson didn't answer that because he didn't have an answer that he was comfortable saying out loud. When I'm sure. When I trust it. When I know that the woman I've been talking to for 6 hours across 2 restaurant tables is actually who she seems to be, and not just someone performing who she seems to be, the way people do, the way I've seen before. He couldn't say any of that without it sounding like exactly what it was. Fear operating as prudence. She's a waitress, he said instead. At that place Sophie likes on Clement Street. Daniel was quiet for a moment. The soup review place? Yeah. Sophie approved. It wasn't a question. Grayson nodded. Okay, Daniel said and went back to his papers, which was his way of saying the conversation was done, but he'd registered everything. October came in gray and cold and persistent. Grayson and Lily found a rhythm that he hadn't expected to find this quickly. Dinners on Thursdays, occasional weekend lunches that somehow now included Sophie, who had inserted herself into the arrangement with the calm certainty of someone who didn't see why she should be excluded. Sophie had opinions about Lily. She kept them organized. She remembered what the soup was this week, Sophie reported on a Sunday evening, sitting cross-legged on the kitchen island while Grayson made dinner. Without me asking. That's called paying attention, Grayson said. It's called caring, Sophie corrected. They're different. Paying attention is what you do when you have to. Caring is what you do when you want to. He looked at his daughter over the cutting board. Where do you... I observe, she said. Sophie had started, on the Saturdays when they went to Lou's for lunch, engineering small moments with Lily that were, Grayson was pretty sure, deliberate. She would ask Lily questions that required her to stay at the table for more than a server's standard 30 seconds. She would show her things from the purple notebook, the restaurant reviews, a drawing, once an entire paragraph she'd written about what she thought clouds were made of emotionally, which she described as a creative non-fiction piece. Lily, to her credit, never rushed. She would lean her forearms on the edge of the table and give Sophie the specific quality of attention that adults rarely gave children, the kind that didn't have somewhere else to be. Grayson watched this happen every Saturday and felt something in his chest doing that complicated thing it did. The third real date, just the two of them, no Sophie, no flower on anyone's forearm, was at a small bar with live jazz where Grayson had gone occasionally for years when he needed to think in the presence of sound rather than silence. He told her things that were true without being complete. He told her about starting Pierce Construction at 25 with money he'd saved from years of working for his uncle's firm, about the first project, a small commercial renovation in the Sunset District, and how he'd been on site every day with a crew of 3 guys and his own tools. About the years when the company was real but barely, when making payroll on time felt like a monthly miracle. These were true things. He left out the current revenue figures, the expansion into 5 new markets, the fleet of vehicles with his company name on them, the office tower in Soma where his name was on the lease of the 14th floor. You love it, she said. Not a question. The work? Yeah. Not just the work. She tilted her head. You light up when you talk about the early stuff, the 3-man crew, the first renovation. That's the thing you love. He considered this. It was true in a way he didn't often articulate. Yeah, he said. There was something about that time when the thing you built and the work you did were the same size. You could see all of it at once. Now there's... He stopped. More of it? She offered. More of it, he agreed. Which is good. It's good. She looked at him across the small table. The jazz was playing something slow and complicated. But, she said. He picked up his glass. There's no but. She smiled like she didn't quite believe him, but wasn't going to push. He liked that. Most people pushed. After the jazz bar, they stood on the sidewalk in the October cold, and Lily pulled her jacket tighter and looked up at the sky the way people do in cities, not because there are stars to see, but out of some habit that persisted anyway. This was good, she said. Yeah, he said. It was. She looked at him. I don't know what to make of you, she said, which was probably the most honest thing anyone had said to him in a long time. What do you mean? She thought about it. You seem careful, she said finally. Not cold, just careful. Like you've been somewhere that taught you to be careful. The divorce, he said. She nodded. Same. You were married? Engaged. It's different category, but the end was the same shape. She shrugged. He needed someone who wanted what he wanted, and I wanted the restaurant, and eventually those two things were incompatible. So, he said. They stood there a moment in the uncomplicated way of people who'd said something true and were giving it room to exist. Grayson, she said, and the way she said his name had a different quality than it usually did. More direct, less casual. I'm not looking for a project. I'm not looking to fix or be fixed. I've done a lot of reading about what I want at this point, and I'm pretty clear about it. What is it? She looked at him steadily. Something real. He nodded. Yeah, he said. Me too. He drove home in the truck through the cold October streets and thought about that word. Real. And about the gap that still existed between what she knew about him and what was true, and how that gap was getting harder to look at straight. Sophie found out before Lily did. Not because Grayson told her. Sophie was 8 and kept secrets the way water kept a shape, temporarily, under pressure. But one Friday evening, when he was on the phone with Daniel, standing in the kitchen while Sophie was supposedly doing homework at the kitchen table, he heard her put her pencil down. He turned. She was looking at him with a particular expression, not suspicious exactly, more like the expression of someone who had just assembled the last piece of a puzzle and was staring at the completed picture. Dad, she said. He held up a finger at Daniel and said, 1 second. To Sophie, what? You said the project was going to be 3 months. Sophie, but on the news last week it said Pierce Construction Group just finished the Hargrove complex, which is a big deal. And you're Grayson Pierce, and the construction company is Pierce Construction Group. She tilted her head. That's not a project manager thing. He was quiet. She waited with the patience of someone who'd been waiting a while. No, he said. It's not. She picked up her pencil. Okay, she said. Okay? I already kind of knew. She started writing again. You sign checks sometimes when you think I'm not looking and they have a lot of zeros. Grayson Pierce, who had negotiated with city officials and managed labor disputes and once talked a panicking project director off a literal ledge, stood in his kitchen feeling slightly outnumbered by an 8-year-old. You're not going to ask me why? He said. Lily doesn't know yet, Sophie said without looking up. No. You should tell her. She erased something on her worksheet. She's not like the other ones, Daddy. He looked at his daughter. I know, he said. Soon, Sophie said. It was not a suggestion. He stood at the kitchen window after Sophie went to bed, the city lights doing their usual indifferent thing below, and thought about what soon meant and whether he was brave enough to find out. He wasn't sure yet. But for the first time in 3 years, the uncertainty felt like the beginning of something rather than the weight of something already lost. The Thursday after Sophie's quiet verdict, Grayson showed up at Lou's for lunch. Not Saturday. Thursday. Which was a deviation from the pattern he'd established, and he knew Lily would notice because she noticed patterns the way he did. Not consciously, but the way attentive people absorb the rhythm of things without being told to. She was refilling the salt shakers at the service station when he walked in. She looked up, and her expression did the thing it occasionally did. A small, involuntary shift of surprise that settled quickly into something warmer. You're not a Thursday person, she said. I had a meeting nearby. This was true. He'd arranged it that way. Thought I'd eat somewhere good. She gave him a look that was skeptical in a friendly way and pointed him toward his usual table. He ordered coffee and a sandwich and sat there watching her work while pretending to look at his phone, which was behavior he was not proud of but couldn't seem to stop. There was something about watching Lily Carter in her element that settled something in him. The efficiency of it. The small moments of genuine connection she made with people. The regular who always got the same thing and needed to be greeted by name, the fussy toddler at table 4, whose cracker she produced from her apron pocket before his mother had to ask. The old man in the corner who wanted his coffee refilled every 4 minutes, and whom she refilled with the same expression each time, which was patience that hadn't curdled into performance. She was good at this, not just competent, actually good, in the way that required caring about it. He thought about what she'd told him on the 3rd date. Something real. He thought about Sophie's quiet directive. Soon. He drank his coffee and tried to figure out what soon required of him, specifically, and came up empty in the way he usually came empty on questions that didn't have structural answers. When she brought the check, she set it down and didn't immediately walk away. "Are you okay?" she said. He looked up. "Yeah, why?" "You've been in your head for an hour." "I think in restaurants. It's a habit." She studied him for a second. "Okay." She started to turn. "Lily." She turned back. He opened his mouth and closed it. He had a speech. It was not a long speech, but it was coherent, and it said the things that needed saying, and he had rehearsed it at 5 a.m. while the coffee brewed and Sophie slept. What came out instead was, "Are you free Saturday? I want you to meet someone." She looked at him carefully. "Who?" "My daughter." A beat. "I thought I'd already met her," she said. "I mean, officially, not as your customer." He picked up his coffee cup even though it was empty. "As someone as a more intentional thing." The pause between them was the kind that had specific weight. "Okay," she said. "Okay." "Yes, Grayson." A small smile. "Okay." He drove back to the office, trying to remember whether he'd planned to say that, or whether Sophie had won by proxy from a distance of 4 miles. He suspected it was the latter. The Saturday meeting at Lou's became something else. They went to the park after lunch because Sophie had decided Lily should see where she tested her gravitational experiments, which had expanded from eggs to include everything she could reasonably justify dropping from the top of the jungle gym in the name of science. Lily watched Sophie release a tennis ball and a water balloon simultaneously from approximately 8 feet up and record the results in the purple notebook with the focus of a research scientist. "They land at the same time," Sophie announced. "Galileo was right." "Did you think Galileo was wrong?" Lily asked. "I needed my own data." Sophie uncapped her pen. "Science isn't about believing things, it's about checking." Lily looked at Grayson. He shrugged the shrug of a man who had accepted this about his daughter. "She's going to be terrifying someday," Lily said quietly. "She already is," he said. "She's just polite about it." It was by any reasonable measure a normal Saturday afternoon in a city park. Nothing significant happened. The experiments concluded. Sophie bought a hot chocolate from a cart and shared it with Lily without being asked, which Grayson noted was the highest honor Sophie Pierce had ever conferred on a human being outside his immediate family. They walked back to the parking lot as the afternoon went gray and cold, Sophie between them, holding both their hands for approximately 1 block before declaring she was too old for that and releasing them both and walking ahead with the dignity of someone who had made a point. Grayson glanced at Lily. She was watching Sophie walk ahead with an expression he couldn't entirely classify, something quiet and specific. "She's wonderful," she said. Her voice was matter-of-fact, which made it land harder than if she'd performed the sentiment. "I know," he said. They drove home separately. He watched her brake lights disappear at the intersection and felt the thing in his chest doing its complicated work again, more insistently now, which he chose to interpret as information rather than inconvenience. The months that followed had a quality he didn't have a word for. Not honeymoon phase sweetness. He was past the age where things felt frictionless in early relationships, and Lily seemed to be too. More like the particular satisfaction of construction that was going up straight. Each layer placed deliberately. Each connection checked before you moved to the next one. November arrived and the city got cold in the way that Bay Area cities got cold. Not dramatic, just persistent. A gray that settled in and stayed. Grayson and Lily established habits the way people do when they're not trying to, but find themselves in the same orbits with increasing frequency. Thursday dinners became a fixed thing, not a plan they made each week, but a fact they operated around. She started knowing how he took his coffee, which he found slightly alarming given that he barely knew himself. And he found himself, without intention, memorizing the small geography of her routines. The way she checked her phone after her shifts in case her parents had called. The fact that she kept a book in her bag and read 3 pages on lunch breaks as a form of maintenance rather than pleasure, which she'd explained once by saying sometimes your brain needs something that isn't work or worry. The way she always paid for at least part of their dinners, even when he reached for the check first, because she'd made clear early on that she didn't want the imbalance of it, and he'd understood without needing it, explained further. He liked her. He liked her in the particular way you liked someone whose company you'd actually chosen rather than fallen into. Someone whose presence in a room did something to the room's temperature that you noticed in the absence of it. This, he knew, was the part where the gap between what she knew and what was true stopped being a precaution and started being something else. He knew it. He didn't do anything about it immediately, which was not admirable, but it was honest. The thing was, and he turned this over during the 5 a.m. hours, in the truck on job site drives, in the 15 minutes before his first meeting when Daniel hadn't arrived yet and the office was quiet. The thing was, he was afraid. Not of Lily's reaction exactly, more of the specific revision he'd have to watch happen behind her eyes. The moment where the man she'd been eating dinner with for 2 months became a different, larger, more complicated version of himself. And the previous version, the flannel shirt, the F-150, the project manager who thought in restaurants, became a character she'd been given rather than a person she'd met. He was afraid of watching her recalibrate. He had watched it happen too many times to pretend the fear was irrational. The week before Thanksgiving, Lily's car broke down. He found out because she texted him Thursday morning to cancel dinner, explaining with the kind of tight, dry humor of someone managing a frustrating thing without catastrophizing it. My car has decided to express itself by making a sound like a dying whale. Mechanic says 2 days minimum. Rain check? He texted back, I'll pick you up. A pause. Grayson. You live in the Sunset, I'm in the Richmond. That's out of your way. It's 20 minutes. I can take the bus. Lily? Another pause. Fine. 7? He drove the truck. He pulled up outside her building, a narrow Victorian on a block of similar narrow Victorians, the 4th floor light on. The elevator presumably in one of its working moods because she appeared at street level 2 minutes after he texted that he was there. She was wearing her coat with the collar turned up against the wind, and she looked at the truck with an expression of mild assessment. I thought project managers drove new cars, she said, climbing in. I drive this one, he said. It's extremely old. It works fine. She ran her hand along the dash. Okay, but this is a 2003 at the latest. 2001. She turned to look at him. You have a 25-year-old truck. It runs. So does my apartment's elevator, 60% of the time. That's not a strong argument. He drove them to the Thai place on Geary they'd been to twice before, because she'd declared the green curry the best thing on this street and possibly this block, which was specific praise he'd appreciated. Over dinner, she told him about the mechanic, a guy named Sal who ran a shop 2 blocks from Lou's, and who had, she said, the most honest face I've ever seen on a man who was about to give me bad news, which turned out to be a cracked serpentine belt and a coolant leak, neither catastrophic but collectively expensive. How expensive? Grayson asked. She pushed rice around her plate. Manageable. That's not a number. No, it's not. She looked up. I'm not. It's fine. It'll be fine. I've got a buffer. She said buffer the way people said it when the buffer was thinner than they were admitting. He recognized the language. He'd used it himself in the early years when the company was real but barely. I can help, he said. She shook her head immediately. No. Lily, no. No. Not harsh, just firm. I'm not doing that. I borrowed money I couldn't pay back, and it's one of the worst feelings in the world. I'm not doing it with someone I'm... She stopped, restarted. With you. He watched her. What were you going to say? Nothing. You stopped mid-sentence. She picked up her water glass. Someone I care about, she said into the glass. I'm not borrowing money from someone I care about. The words landed in the specific, quiet way that words did when they said more than they were trying to. He looked at his plate. "Okay," he said. "Don't say it like that." "Like what?" "Like you're accepting a verdict you disagree with." He looked up. "I respect it," he said. "I'm just—" He paused. "I want to help. That's all. It's not complicated." She looked at him across the table. The restaurant was warm, the green curry was good. The November rain had started up outside the window. "I know," she said. "That's one of the things that's—" She stopped again. "Lily, you make it hard not to let people in." She said it like a confession and immediately looked like she hadn't meant to say it quite that directly. "Anyway, the car. It'll be fine." He drove her home in the rain. She thanked him for dinner and the ride. He waited until her fourth-floor light came on before he pulled away from the curb, which was not a habit he'd started consciously, but which he'd apparently started. He thought, on the drive home, about the word she'd used. Care. He thought about the word he would have used if he was being precise about it. He would have used a different word. He wasn't ready to say it out loud yet, even to himself at 5 a.m. in the quiet kitchen. But he knew what it was. The week after Thanksgiving, he told Claire. She was in town for the holiday, staying with a friend in Noe Valley, and they had coffee on Saturday morning while Sophie was at a sleepover. Claire was a woman who processed information in real time and out loud, which meant that the conversation went through several stages in the first 10 minutes. Excitement, a series of rapid questions about Lily's background and profession that Grayson answered patiently, and then a thoughtful silence as she worked through the part that mattered. "She doesn't know," Claire said. "No." "How long has this been going on?" 2 months, about. Claire wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. She had their mother's hands, wide-palmed, capable-looking, gray. "I know. This is different from the first date thing. This is—" "I know, Claire. Have you thought about what happens if she finds out some other way, before you tell her?" He had thought about this. He thought about it the way he thought about structural risk on a job, not obsessively, but with the particular attention you owed something that could fail significantly if it went wrong. "Yes," he said. "And?" "And I'm going to tell her." "When?" He picked up his coffee. "Soon." Claire gave him the look she'd been giving him since they were children, patient, fond, slightly exhausted. "You keep saying soon." "I know." "What are you waiting for exactly?" He was quiet for a moment. Outside the coffee shop window, the Saturday street moved through its routines. People with dogs, people with strollers, a delivery truck double parked outside the pharmacy. "I want it to be right," he said finally. "I want to have the conversation in a way where she can hear it for what it is, not—" He stopped. "Not as a betrayal, because it's not a betrayal. It's just fear," Claire said, not unkindly. He looked at her. "You're afraid she's going to look at you differently," Claire said. "And you know what? She might. That's real. But Gray—" She leaned forward slightly. "The longer you wait, the more ammunition you're handing the fear. Because by now it's not just that she doesn't know about the company. It's that you've been having dinner with her for 2 months and she still doesn't know. Those are different things." He knew she was right. He'd known it for weeks. Knowing didn't seem to produce action the way it theoretically should have. "She told me she cares about me," he said. Claire's expression softened. "Of course she does." "She said I make it hard not to let people in." "That's Gray." His sister looked at him steadily. "That's the most straightforwardly good thing anyone's said to you in years, and you're sitting here analyzing it instead of just—" She stopped, sighed. "You've been alone too long. You've been managing it so hard that you've forgotten how to just feel it." He looked at his coffee. He didn't disagree. December came in cold, and Grayson felt the weight of what he wasn't saying more acutely than he had before. Lily was becoming not integrated into his life exactly, because he was careful to keep the larger structures of his life out of view. But she was becoming real in the way that people became real when you started caring about their days separate from when you were in them. He noticed himself, mid-meeting, wondering whether Luz had been busy, whether the elevator in her building was working, whether Sal the mechanic had gotten the car done on time. He texted her for no reason sometimes. Not often enough to be a thing he'd cop to, just occasionally. A news story she'd find funny. A photo Sophie texted him of her latest experiment that he forwarded without comment. She texted back in kind. Small things, low stakes, the digital equivalent of someone leaving a window open between two rooms. Sophie noticed. She tracked the relationship with the attentiveness of a child who had decided it was important and therefore warranted monitoring. "You smiled at your phone," she said one December evening, looking up from her homework. "I smile at lots of things." "Not like that." She returned to her homework. "That was a Lily smile." He put the phone face down. "She's coming to the winter carnival," Sophie said. "Right?" "Sophie." "I already told Mrs. Hernandez that my dad was bringing someone." She said it without looking up, with the calm of someone who had decided the outcome and was simply managing logistics. "You can't just decide." "I didn't decide. I planned." She looked up. "There's a difference. Planning is proactive. Deciding is reactive. You've taught me that." He stared at his daughter. "Don't use my own management philosophy against me," he said. "It works on construction sites," she said. "Why not family life?" The Winter Carnival was a school event, slightly chaotic, full of craft tables and baked goods and children running with the specific energy of people who'd been inside for too long. Grayson texted Lily about it with what he intended as casual spontaneity, and what he suspected she read as something more deliberate, because she said yes without hesitation, and arrived wearing a red scarf he'd never seen before, and said hello to Sophie first, which was the right call, and which Sophie noted, as she noted everything. They wandered through the gymnasium-turned-carnival for 2 hours. Sophie made a ceramic pot that she described as abstract, which was a diplomatic term for shapeless. Lily helped her paint it with blue and green and something that was supposed to be gold but came out closer to yellow. And Sophie declared it impressionistic, with such conviction that Grayson almost believed she'd planned it. At one point, Grayson was standing at the edge of the room, holding Sophie's jacket and 3 cookies she'd acquired and forgotten, watching Lily and Sophie at a craft table across the room. Sophie was explaining something with her hands. She explained most things with her hands, and Lily was listening with her full face, the way she did, the way that meant she was actually in the conversation rather than managing it. A woman appeared at his elbow. One of the other parents, someone he'd seen at drop-off occasionally, whose name he'd never caught. "Your wife seems lovely," she said, smiling. He looked at her, looked back at Lily and Sophie. We're not." He stopped. The woman waited pleasantly. "Thank you," he said, because there wasn't a clean correction available that didn't require more explanation than he had cookies in his hands to manage. The woman moved on. Grayson stood there holding the jacket and the cookies and thought about the fact that a stranger across a gymnasium had looked at the 3 of them and seen a family, and that his reaction to that had not been discomfort. He thought about what that meant. He looked at Lily, who was laughing at something Sophie had said, her red scarf bright against the beige gymnasium walls. And he thought about Claire's words. By now, it's not just that she doesn't know about the company. It's that you've been having dinner with her for 2 months, and she still doesn't know. 3 months now. 3 months of Thursday dinners and park experiments, and the winter carnival and the 20-minute drive through November rain. He had to tell her. He knew the shape of the conversation. He'd had versions of it in his head for weeks. He knew he needed to do it soon, before soon became a word that had lost all meaning from overuse. Before the gap between what she knew and what was true became so wide that crossing it required something more than honesty. He drove home that night with Sophie asleep in the back seat, her ceramic pot wrapped in her lap, and thought about how you told someone the truth without making the truth the most important thing about you. He hadn't figured it out yet. But in the way that certain decisions made themselves when you stopped trying to engineer them, in the way that he'd learned over years of building things, that sometimes the right next step revealed itself only when you stopped standing still, he understood that it was coming. The following Thursday, over dinner at the Thai place, Lily looked at him across the green curry and said something that changed the timeline of everything. "My parents want to meet you," she said. He looked up. She was holding her fork with a casualness that he understood, by now, meant she was nervous. Lily's casual was carefully calibrated. It was something she deployed when she cared about the reaction. "Yeah?" he said. "They're coming down after Christmas. My mom's been asking about you since October." She set the fork down. "I told them you were a project manager, and that you had a daughter and that I liked you." She paused. "In those words, I didn't." She looked at her plate. "I don't know why I'm being weird about this." "You're not being weird. I am a little weird about it. It's fine. It's good." He looked at her. "I want to meet them." She looked up. "You do?" "Yes." "Okay." The careful casual dropped slightly. "Okay. After Christmas, then." He reached for his water glass. After Christmas, which meant he had 3 weeks, approximately, to have the conversation that was now 3 months overdue. Because he was not going to meet Lily Carter's parents as a man who managed other people's projects. He was not going to sit across from her family and answer questions about his life with the edited, partial version of himself that he'd been maintaining since September. He was going to tell her, this week, before Christmas. He was going to sit across from her and say the thing that needed saying and watch whatever happened next happen. He was afraid of it. He'd been afraid of it for 3 months. That hadn't changed. But he was more afraid now of the alternative, of the specific look on her face if she found out some other way, of the moment where the gap became too wide for honesty to cross. He drove home that night and sat in the truck in his driveway for 7 minutes, which was 3 more than usual, and then went inside and stood in the kitchen in the dark and thought about the version of himself that was going to walk into a restaurant in the next week and tell the truth. He thought about what she would say. He thought about what he was afraid she would say and what he hoped she would say, and how those two things were not entirely different. He made coffee, even though it was too late for coffee, and drank it at the kitchen window and watched the city lights do their usual indifferent thing, and thought about how the hardest structures to build were always the ones that mattered most. Sophie padded into the kitchen at 10:30, which was an hour past her bedtime, wearing the dinosaur pajamas. "You're still up," she observed. "So are you." She climbed onto the bar stool. "I had a dream that the ceramic pot fell off the shelf." "It won't. I put it on the low shelf." "That's forward thinking." She looked at him. He had his coffee at the window and the specific expression he got when he was working something out. She'd seen it enough to know. "Is it Lily?" "Go to sleep, Sophie." "Just say yes or no." He looked at her. "Yes." She nodded like she'd expected this. "Are you going to tell her?" "Yes." "This week?" He turned back to the window. "This week." She was quiet for a moment. "Okay." She slid off the bar stool. "I think she'll be okay," she said, in the matter-of-fact voice she used when she was saying something she'd been holding for a while. "She likes you, the real you, not the truck." He looked at his daughter. "I know," he said. "The truck is pretty bad, Daddy." "Go to bed." She went to bed. He stood at the window with the cold coffee and the city lights, and he didn't feel ready exactly, but he felt something adjacent to it. The feeling he remembered from the early years standing outside a client's door with a proposal he'd spent weeks on and didn't know would land. The feeling right before you committed to the next move. He washed the coffee cup and turned off the kitchen light and went to bed. He was going to tell her. The only question now was whether the truth would be a bridge or a wall. He lay in the dark and thought that he was about to find out. He planned it for Tuesday. Not Thursday. Thursday was their established thing, which meant it carried the weight of routine, and routine had a way of softening the edges of conversations that needed edges. Tuesday was neutral, a restaurant they hadn't been to before, somewhere without accumulated context. He made a reservation at a small Italian place in Hayes Valley that Daniel had mentioned once, the kind of place with cloth napkins and enough ambient noise to keep a hard conversation from feeling like a performance. He was going to tell her on Tuesday. Monday morning, the storm hit. He was on the phone with his site supervisor at the Dillard project in the Excelsior when the rain started, and within 40 minutes it had become the kind of rain that cities weren't built for. Not the persistent gray Bay Area drizzle that everyone had learned to navigate, but something genuinely violent, fast, and indifferent to whatever it interrupted. The drainage system on 3 residential blocks near the Dillard site couldn't handle the volume. By noon, the basements of 7 homes were flooded. By 2 in the afternoon, a retaining wall on the adjacent property, aging concrete, nothing to do with Pierce construction, but geographically connected to their footprint, had partially collapsed, taking a section of fencing and 3 feet of someone's backyard with it. Grayson was on site by 2:30. The neighborhood looked like a place that had been struck hard, and suddenly, which it had. People stood in front of their houses in rain jackets, holding their phones, filming the water in their streets, calling their insurance companies, talking to neighbors about what had happened to their property in the specific shell-shocked way that people talked about disasters before they fully understood what the word damage was going to mean to their finances. An elderly woman on the corner was sitting on her porch steps in the rain because she didn't want to go inside until she knew the foundation was sound, and nobody had told her yet whether it was. His site supervisor, a guy named Reyes, who'd been with Pierce Construction for 4 years and who had the particular competence of someone who didn't panic in the presence of problems, met him at the edge of the block. "Retaining wall's a complete loss," Reyes said. "Not ours, but we're the biggest operation on the block and people are going to look to us. 3 residential properties have basement flooding. 2 more are at risk if the rain keeps up. City crews are overwhelmed." "What do we have on site?" 2 pumping units, a crew of 14, materials from the Dillard build." Reyes paused. "We've got enough to help. Question is whether we're authorized to do work outside our contracted scope." Grayson looked at the elderly woman on the porch steps. "Get the pumps to the 3 flooded properties," he said. "Start with the one on the corner. I'll call legal." Reyes didn't ask twice. What followed was 22 hours that Grayson would later remember in the way you remembered things that required everything you had, not cinematically, but in fragments, physical and specific. The cold that got into his jacket by hour 3 and didn't leave. The moment one of the homeowners, a man in his 50s named Walter, grabbed his hand and said thank you with the particular desperation of someone whose entire life savings was currently submerged in his basement, and Grayson not knowing what to say back except, "We're going to get it out." The call to his legal team at 9 p.m. to authorize emergency volunteer work under the company's liability umbrella, which his lawyer approved with notable speed. The moment Reyes looked at him over a generator at midnight and said, "You know this is going to cost us actual money," and Grayson said, "Yeah," and Reyes nodded and went back to work. By Tuesday morning, the immediate crisis had been stabilized. The pumps had cleared 3 basements. A temporary barrier had been constructed to protect the 2 at-risk properties. The retaining wall issue had been flagged to the city, and a structural assessment was scheduled. The crew had worked through the night, and Grayson had worked alongside them, which was not unusual for him in crisis situations, and which his crew understood was not a performance, but simply how he operated. He called Lily from the truck at 7 a.m. to cancel Tuesday. "Hey," she said. She sounded like she'd been awake for a while. "I saw the flooding on the news last night. Are you okay?" "Yeah, I'm fine. I've been on a job site. One of our projects is near the affected area." All true. "I have to cancel tonight. I'm sorry." "Of course, don't apologize." A brief pause. "Was anyone hurt?" "No, property damage. We helped some homeowners with flooding." "You helped them?" "Our crew had the equipment nearby." Another pause, different quality. "That's... Of course you did." She said it quietly, almost to herself. "Are you going home to sleep?" "In a bit. I need to check a few things first." "Grayson." Her voice had a specific tone. "Go sleep." "Yes, ma'am," he said, which made her laugh, which was the right outcome. He went home and slept for 4 hours and woke up to 17 text messages, 2 calls from his PR director, a woman named Anita who managed Pierce Construction's public communications, and 1 voicemail from a local news station. He listened to the voicemail, deleted it, called Anita. "Channel 4 already has footage," Anita said, without preamble. "Reyes let them on site this morning, which I wish he'd checked with me about, but the coverage is positive. Human interest angle. Billionaire construction company deploys crew to help flooded homeowners." She paused. "Your name is in the Chiron, Gray." He closed his eyes. "Pull the Chiron," he said. "I can't pull a news station's Chiron. It's already broadcast." Another pause. "It's also going to run again at noon and 6. And someone clipped it and it's been shared about 800 times on social media in the past 3 hours. He sat on the edge of his bed. Okay, he said. There's nothing to manage here that's bad, Anita said carefully. It's good coverage. The story is good because you did a good thing. I just wanted you to know it was out there. I know. Thank you, Anita. He ended the call and sat there for a moment. He thought about Lily, who worked lunch shifts at Lou's on Tuesdays, and who, like everyone else within reach of a television or a phone, might see a news clip sometime in the next 12 hours that would answer in the messiest possible way the question he'd been planning to answer on his own terms tonight. He picked up his phone. He put it back down. He didn't know what to text. Hey, before you see the news today, was not a sentence that ended cleanly. There's something I've been meaning to tell you had 3 months of delay built into it that no Tuesday restaurant reservation could fix. He was going to call her. He decided this. He was going to call her right now and say the thing, even imperfectly, even without the cloth napkins and the neutral restaurant and the prepared speech. His phone rang. It was Sophie's school. A scheduling call about the winter break program. He took it because you took calls from your kid's school, and by the time it ended, 4 minutes, administrative, something in him had recalculated. He would tell her tonight. He'd reschedule, find a way, go to Lou's after her shift. He would not wait for the news to do it for him. He showered. He changed. He drove to the office. At 12:17 p.m., he was in a meeting with his finance director when his phone lit up on the table with a text from Lily. He glanced at it. Are you watching the news? His stomach did a specific thing. He picked up the phone, excused himself from the meeting, stepped into the hallway. He called her. It rang 4 times. Then voicemail. He didn't leave a message, texted instead. Can we talk? Call me when you get a chance. She didn't call back for 3 hours. He checked his phone approximately every 4 minutes, which was not a frequency he was proud of. He got through 2 meetings and a contract review and a conversation with Reyes about site cleanup, and underneath all of it was the specific awareness of a person waiting for a call that wasn't coming. At 3:42, she texted, I'm off at 4. Can you come to Lou's? He read the text twice. The tone was impossible to calibrate in 4 words. It wasn't warm. It wasn't cold. It was simply factual, which from Lily, who was rarely simply factual, told him something. I'll be there at 4, he wrote back. He left the office at 3:15 and drove to Clement Street and sat in the truck across from Lou's for 20 minutes before going in. Through the front window, he could see the restaurant winding down from the lunch rush. Tables being reset, the last few customers finishing up. He could see Lily's green apron moving through the room with its characteristic efficiency, and he watched it the way you watched something you understood you were about to change. At 3:58, he went inside. The lunch crowd was gone. Lou's in the late afternoon had a different atmosphere than it did at noon. Quieter, more honest somehow, the way places felt when they stopped performing for an audience and just existed. The afternoon light came in at a low angle through the front windows and did something specific to the room's worn wood and mismatched chairs that made it look like a painting of itself. Lily was at the service counter, out of her apron now, in jeans and a gray sweater. She had her coat over her arm. She looked at him when he came in, and the look was one he hadn't seen from her before. Not angry, not closed, but carefully neutral in a way that was clearly costing her something. Hey, he said. Hey. She tilted her head toward the corner table, the one farthest from the door. Can we sit? They sat. There was no coffee, no menus, no context of a meal. Just the two of them at the corner table in the late afternoon light with the thing that needed saying between them. She put her phone on the table. She'd paused the video on a news clip. Channel 4, Anita had said. And the frozen frame showed a man in a Pierce construction jacket directing a pump crew outside a flooded basement. The chyron at the bottom of the screen read, Pierce Construction Group founder deploys crew to aid storm victims. He looked at the screen, then at her. Okay, he said. Okay? She said it quietly. Not a question exactly, more like she was testing the shape of the word. I was going to tell you tonight, he said. I'd planned to. Tonight or the next time I saw you. He paused. I know that sounds convenient. It does sound a little convenient, she said. Not unkindly, just honestly. I know. She looked at the frozen frame on her phone. Pierce Construction Group, she said. That's yours. Yes. You're the founder. Yes. She was quiet. Outside, a bus went by on Clement Street, rattling the front windows slightly the way it always did, and neither of them looked at it. You told me you were a project manager, she said. I manage projects. He stopped. That was a weak answer. I'm not going to give you a weak answer. He put both hands on the table. I deliberately let you believe I was something smaller than I am. I did it intentionally. I've been doing it since before I met you. It started before us. But with you, it went on longer than it should have. And I knew that. And I kept telling myself I'd fix it, and I didn't fix it fast enough. Lily looked at the table. She had a habit when she was processing something difficult of going very still shots. Not the stillness of someone shutting down, but the stillness of someone concentrating hard on something that required their full attention. He'd noticed it before, over the car repair, over the restaurant she'd lost. She went still with hard things the way other people went loud. How big is it? She said. The company. He told her. He gave her the number. Not the full valuation, which included assets she'd need a finance degree to contextualize, but the revenue figure that told the real story. He watched her face as the number landed. She didn't react the way he'd expected. She didn't go quiet or go wide-eyed or recalibrate in the way he'd watched other women recalibrate. What happened was something more like the opposite. Something in her expression closed down, slightly, the way a door closed when the person inside needed privacy. The truck, she said. Yes. The flannel shirts. Yes. The project manager thing. Yes. She picked up her phone and set it face down. Then she looked at him, and what was in her face was something he hadn't anticipated and found he didn't know how to manage. It wasn't anger, it wasn't hurt exactly. It was more like the expression of someone who had trusted a map and just discovered the map had been drawn wrong. Not rage at the cartographer, just the disorientation of standing somewhere you didn't recognize. Why? She said. He'd prepared for this question. He knew the answer. He knew the shape of it, and he'd rehearsed it in the quiet kitchen at 5 a.m. and in the truck on the drive over. But sitting across from her in the late afternoon light at the corner table of the restaurant where they'd first actually met, the prepared answer felt too constructed for the moment. He told her the truth instead. Because it kept happening, he said. I'd go on a date, and somewhere in the middle of it I'd watch the woman figure out who I was, and then I'd watch her become a different person. Not always dramatically. Sometimes just a shift. The questions changed. The energy changed. And I couldn't know anymore whether anything that came after was real or whether it was just a very good performance of real. He paused. I'd been through a marriage that ended badly. My ex-wife, I'm not going to make her into a villain. It's more complicated than that. But money changed things between us too. Not everything, but enough. He looked at his hands on the table. I got tired of wondering. So you lied, she said. I left things out, he said. She looked at him. I know that sounds like a distinction without a difference, he said. It does. But there's a version of it that isn't... He stopped, tried again. I never lied about who I am as a person. Everything I told you about myself, about Sophie, about the work I love, about what I want, all of it was true. The only thing I controlled was the scale. She was quiet. Lily, I'm thinking, she said. He waited. The restaurant around them made its quiet sounds. The hum of the refrigerator case at the counter, the faint noise of traffic through the walls, the particular acoustic of a room that had absorbed decades of conversations and held them in the walls somewhere. I borrowed money from my parents for a restaurant that failed, she said finally. I've been working doubles at Lou's for 2 years trying to rebuild my savings to the point where I can try something again someday. I live on the 4th floor of a building where the elevator works 60% of the time. I told you all of that. She looked at him. I told you that on the second date because I thought honesty was... She stopped. I felt like an idiot just now, watching that clip. I felt like an idiot. You're not... I know I'm not. Her voice was steady, but there was something in it that had the quality of something held carefully. But I felt like one. And that feeling, whether or not it's accurate, it's real, and it's there right now, and I need you to understand that. I understand it, he said. I caused it. I know that. She looked at the window. The afternoon light was going the particular way November light went, fast, without warning. That woman on the news, she said, standing in front of the flooded house, the one they interviewed, she said your crew showed up and just started working, didn't wait to be asked, didn't bill anyone. Yeah. You were there? All night. She looked back at him. That part, I believe, she said, and the way she said it, not conceding, not absolving, just accurate, was the most honest thing she'd said in the last 10 minutes, which was saying something. I know I don't have the right to ask you for anything right now, he said, but I'm asking anyway. Don't make a decision about this tonight. Not because I need more time, I don't. I'm done buying time. But because I think if you make a decision tonight, you're going to make it from the wrong thing. What's the wrong thing? Surprise, he said. The shock of it, He stopped. I don't want you to decide this based on how it landed, because how it landed is my fault, and you deserve to make a decision based on who I actually am, which you already know. You've known it for 3 months. She looked at him for a long time. That's a very well-constructed argument, she said. I've been rehearsing it since September, he said. Something moved across her face. Not a smile exactly. More like the idea of one, somewhere behind the guard she'd put up. 3 months, she said. I know. 3 months of flannel shirts. I own a lot of flannel shirts. She looked at the table. I need to think, she said. Okay. I'm not saying it's over. She looked at him when she said this, which he understood was a specific choice. I'm saying I need to think, and I need not to look at you while I'm doing it, because looking at you makes it harder to think clearly, and that's a problem I'm going to have to work around. How long? He asked. She picked up her coat. I'll let you know. She stood up. He stood up because he always stood up, and she paused when he did it, just for a second. The project manager thing, she said. Yeah. You told me you ran a 3-man crew in the beginning, out of a leased van. I did. That was completely true. The soup review, Sophie, the way you talked about the early years of the business, the stuff about what you wanted from... She stopped. Was any of that a performance? He looked at her directly. No. She held his gaze for a moment, then she nodded, the small decisive nod she made when she'd processed something and was filing it. Okay, she said. She walked out. He stood at the corner table alone in Lou's after-hours light and listened to the door close behind her and felt the specific quality of a silence that was not the same as the end of something but was not comfortable either. It was the silence of an open question, which was the hardest kind. He drove home in the dark. Sophie was at the kitchen island with her homework when he came in. She looked at him once, the observational scan that was entirely her own, and said nothing. She went back to her worksheet. He made coffee, stood at the window. Daddy, Sophie said after a few minutes. Yeah. You told her? Yes. A pause. How did it go? He thought about how to answer that. About Lily's face when she said I felt like an idiot. About the way she'd said I need to think with the particular specificity that meant she actually would. About the fact that she'd told him it wasn't over before she left, which she hadn't needed to do. She's thinking about it, he said. Sophie was quiet. He heard her pencil scratch across paper. That's fair, she said finally. Yeah, he said. It is. He drank his coffee at the window and tried not to check his phone and mostly succeeded. The city was doing its usual thing outside, indifferent and continuous, and he stood in his kitchen in the dark and waited for the quiet to tell him something useful. It didn't. It rarely did. That was the thing about the 5 a.m. hours. They gave you space to think, but they didn't give you answers. Answers came from the world, eventually, when you'd done the thing that required them. He had done the thing. The rest was Lily's to carry now. He thought about her sitting somewhere in her fourth-floor apartment with the part-time elevator, in the building he'd never been inside, and he hoped she was somewhere warm. He hoped she was eating something. He hoped the thought he'd left her with, "You already know who I am, you've known for 3 months," was doing the work he'd meant it to do. He turned off the kitchen light. He was not someone who prayed, but there was something in him that night that functioned similarly. A directed hope, specific and quiet, that the woman who had sat across from him at this same restaurant and said something real with the tone of someone who meant it would remember when she was ready, that was exactly what she'd had. The next morning he sent her one text. "I'm not going to call or text again until you're ready, but I want you to know, I would have told you Tuesday. I'd finally figured out that I had to. I want you to know that happened before the news, not because of it." He put the phone down. He went to work. He didn't check for a reply for 2 hours, which was the longest he'd managed in 3 months. When he finally looked, there was nothing. He put the phone back in his pocket and went into his meeting and was, as far as Daniel could tell, completely focused on the Hargrove contract revisions, which was either excellent professional discipline or a very good performance of it. Daniel, who knew the difference, suspected the latter, but kept it to himself. 3 days passed. On the third day, which was a Friday and which had the particular gray weight of a week that had cost more than it gave back, Grayson picked Sophie up from school and took her to the bookstore because it was her standing request when things were complicated and she needed somewhere to exist quietly. Sophie browsed the children's section with the systematic attention she brought to everything, and Grayson stood in the adjacent section with a book he wasn't reading and checked his phone in the particular way of someone who had decided not to check his phone. Nothing. He drove home, made dinner. Sophie ate quietly, which for Sophie was notable. After dinner, she pushed her plate back and looked at him across the table with the expression of someone who had been patient long enough. "Daddy," she said. "She's thinking, Sophie." "I know, but I'm thinking too." She folded her hands on the table, his gesture, something she'd absorbed somewhere. "She's going to come back." "You don't know that." "I do know that." The certainty in her voice was not the bravado of a child who refused to consider alternatives. It was something quieter. "She sat with me at the park for an hour while I dropped things off at Jungle Gym. She read my soup review. She came to the carnival." Sophie paused. "She didn't do all that because she liked a project manager. She did it because she liked us." Grayson looked at his daughter. "When did you get this smart?" he said. "I've always been this smart," she said. "You've just been distracted." He laughed. It was the first time he'd laughed in 3 days, and it surprised him. Sophie smiled, the smile she kept for moments when she'd done the thing she was trying to do. She cleared her plate and went to do her homework, and he sat at the kitchen table alone and let the laugh settle into the room. His phone buzzed. He looked at the screen. "Lily. 1 line. I need another day. But I wanted you to know I read your text." He stared at it. "Read it again." He typed, "Take all the time you need." He put the phone down. 1 more day. He could do 1 more day. 1 more day turned into 2. He didn't text again. He'd meant what he said. He was going to let her carry it at whatever pace she needed. And he held to that with the particular discipline of a man who understood that the hardest part of waiting was not the waiting itself, but the temptation to fill the silence with noise. He'd done enough of that in his life. Said things to make spaces smaller, sent messages to create the illusion of movement. He wasn't going to do it here. He went to work. He reviewed the Hargrove punch list. He had a 40-minute call with the city planning office about permits for a spring project in the dog patch that required more patience than he currently had in stock. He ate lunch at his desk, which Daniel noted with the quiet disapproval of someone who had opinions about eating at desks and felt no compulsion to hide them. "You're not going to be useful to anyone like this," Daniel said, setting a coffee on Grayson's desk without being asked. "I'm fine." "You reviewed the Hargrove punch list twice and flagged the same item both times." Grayson looked at his papers. "I was being thorough." "You were somewhere else." Daniel sat down in the chair across from the desk with the ease of someone who'd long since stopped asking permission. "She texted you yesterday?" 1 line. "But she texted." Grayson picked up the coffee. "She said she needed another day." "And you said?" "That she should take the time she needed." Daniel nodded slowly. Good. I know it's good. I'm still... He stopped. Still waiting, Daniel said. Yeah. Daniel was quiet for a moment. He was not a man who trafficked in reassurance, which was one of the reasons Grayson trusted him. He didn't say it'll be fine or she'll come around. What he said was, "You did the right thing telling her, however it lands." "I know. Just making sure you know." Grayson looked at the window. The December sky outside was the flat white of a city preparing for more rain. She said she felt like an idiot when she saw the news clip. That's the part I keep coming back to. Why? Because that's my fault specifically. The rest of it, the decision to hide it, the system I built before I met her, that's complicated. But making her feel like an idiot is just a clean, direct consequence of what I did, and I can't make it more nuanced than that. Daniel was quiet. She also said it wasn't over, Grayson said, before she left. She didn't have to say that. No, Grayson said. She didn't. Daniel picked up his own coffee, which he'd brought with him, and stood up. Then you wait, he said, and you don't eat lunch at your desk because you can't think straight on an empty stomach, and we have a lot of work to do. Grayson looked at him. Fine, he said. They ate at the sandwich place on the corner, at an outdoor table under the heating lamps despite the cold, because Daniel had inexplicable opinions about fresh air. They talked about the Hargrove project and the spring permits, and a new contract Daniel thought they should bid. They did not talk about Lily. Grayson ate his entire sandwich and felt marginally more like a functional human being. That was day 1 of 2. The second day was Saturday. Sophie had her experiment group in the morning, 3 kids from her class who came over periodically to conduct what she described as collaborative research, which involved a lot of noise and the controlled destruction of several household items. Grayson made them sandwiches at noon and cleared out to his home office while they argued about the correct methodology for testing whether different liquids froze at different rates, which they were apparently planning to do in the freezer without asking. He sat at his desk and did not check his phone. He checked his phone at 12:47. Nothing. He worked on the spring permit documentation. He was good at this kind of work, detailed, structural, requiring precision, and it occupied enough of his brain that the waiting moved to the background, not gone, but quieter. At 2:15, his phone buzzed. He reached for it. Sophie's experiment group had flooded the freezer tray with what turned out to be an entire bottle of apple juice, and the text was from Sophie herself, sent from 15 feet away, reading, "We have a situation." He dealt with the freezer tray. At 3:40, he was back at his desk. At 4:02, his phone buzzed again. "Can I come over?" 2 seconds of looking at the screen. Then, "Yes. Text me when you're close." He put the phone down and sat still for a moment. Then he went to tell Sophie to start cleaning up the experiment materials, which she began doing with the somewhat guilty energy of someone who understood that the stakes of the afternoon had shifted. "Is it Lily?" Sophie asked. "Yeah." Sophie looked at him with the careful expression she wore when she was deciding whether to say what she was thinking. "Say it," he said. "I wasn't going to say anything." "Sophie, I was going to say..." She picked up the apple juice bottle. "Your hair. You should fix your hair." He touched his hair. "What's wrong with my hair?" "It's doing the thing it does when you've been running your hand through it." He went to find a mirror. Lily texted when she was a block away. He opened the front door before she knocked, which he'd told himself he wasn't going to do, and she was standing on his front step in her coat with the collar up and her dark hair down against the wind, and she looked at him with an expression that was tired in a specific way, the tiredness of someone who'd spent 2 days carrying something heavy and was ready to put it down. "Hi," she said. "Hi," he said. "Come in." She came in. She looked around the entryway, the real one, not the edited version of his life she'd been adjacent to. He'd thought about this moment, what it would feel like for her to see the house, the actual dimensions of the life he'd kept off stage. The entryway was not ostentatious. He'd never been interested in spaces that announced themselves. But it was unmistakably the home of someone who had not been worrying about money for a while, and there was nothing to be done about that. She looked at it quietly, took it in, didn't comment. Sophie appeared from the hallway. "Hi, Lily," she said. "Hi, Sophie. Lily's voice warmed in the specific way it always did with Sophie, which was involuntary, which Grayson had noticed and filed a long time ago. How's the research going? We had a setback with the juice, Sophie said, but setbacks are data. That's a good way to think about it. Sophie looked at her father, then at Lily. She read the room with the accuracy of someone who'd been reading rooms since she was old enough to understand that adults had subtext. I'm going to go do homework, she said, which was the least Sophie-like sentence Grayson had heard her say in recent memory, and which he appreciated more than he could express. She disappeared down the hallway. He led Lily to the kitchen. He didn't take her to the living room, which felt too formal for this, or to his office, which felt too structured. The kitchen was where everything real happened in this house, and it seemed like the right place for this. Do you want coffee? He said. No. She sat down at the island. I just want to talk. He sat across from her. No coffee, no food, no props, just the kitchen and the late afternoon light and whatever she'd come to say. She put her hands flat on the counter. She had a tell. He'd learned it over 3 months, where she pressed her palms down when she was making herself stay present in a difficult conversation rather than retreating from it. He'd seen it over the restaurant story, over the car repair, once when she'd told him about her mother's health scare the previous year. It was the gesture of someone who defaulted to flight and had trained themselves not to. I've been thinking, she said. I know. Don't be... She stopped. Sorry, I'm not trying to be funny. You weren't being funny, I just... He paused. I know you've been thinking. I've been thinking too. I'll stop filling the air. She looked at him, a brief almost smile, then gone. I'm angry, she said. I want to start there because I think I wasn't clear about that at Lou's. I was in shock more than I was angry, and the anger is more honest. Okay? I'm angry because I was honest with you from the beginning. I handed you the embarrassing stuff early because I thought that was what we were doing. I thought we were building something where the actual truth of people was on the table. My failed restaurant, my borrowed money, my crappy elevator. I gave you all of that. She looked at her hands. And you gave me a flannel shirt and a truck. Yes, he said. That's not... She stopped, started again. You didn't trust me. No, he said. I didn't. She looked up. That's the honest answer, he said. I'd been burned enough times that I stopped extending trust to people before I had evidence for it. Which is, it makes sense as a system. I'm not going to pretend it was irrational. But the cost of the system was that I applied it to you when you hadn't done anything to earn it, and that wasn't fair. She was quiet. Can I ask you something? He said. Yes. The things I told you about what I wanted, about Sophie, about the early years of the company, what it felt like, what matters to me about it. Did any of that feel false? She considered this with the honest attention she gave hard questions. No, she said. Because it wasn't. Every single thing I said to you about who I am, what I care about, what I'm afraid of, what I want, was true. I have never once been performing for you. The only thing I controlled was the financial variable, which I know isn't a small thing. I'm not arguing it's a small thing. It's not a small thing, she said. I know. It's also not the only thing. She looked at him. That's what I've been sitting with for 2 days. The fact that it's not the only thing. She pulled her coat tighter across her chest, not like she was cold, but like she needed the pressure of it. I met you in September, and you were a man who was kind to a waitress he'd never met, and patient with an 8-year-old who wanted to discuss soup texture. And then I went on a date with a guy who drove an old truck and talked about work with the kind of genuine feeling that people only have when the thing is actually theirs. And then I spent 3 months with someone who showed up every Thursday and learned how I took my coffee and sat through my bad days and drove 20 minutes in the rain because my car was broken. She stopped. That wasn't the flannel shirt, she said. That was you. He didn't say anything. He let it stay where she'd put it. I'm still angry, she said. You should be. I need you to understand that going forward, if there is a going forward, I need the ledger to be clean. I can't do this if I'm always wondering what else I don't know. That's not sustainable for me. I've been in things where I was always a little bit on the outside of the truth, and it's exhausting. and I won't do it again. Lily. He said her name with the weight he meant it to have. There's nothing else, I promise you. The company, the money, the scale of it, that's the thing that was hidden and it's out now. Everything else you know is everything else there is. She looked at him steadily. Your ex-wife, she said. He held her gaze. What about her? You said the money changed things between you. I don't need the whole story, but I need to know if it's something I should understand before I... She stopped. Before I decide to keep going. He thought about how to say this honestly, without saying it in a way that wasn't his to say. Her name is Rebecca, he said. We met when I was 26 and the company was 4 years old and growing fast. She's not a villain. I want to be clear about that. She's a person who wanted things, and the things she wanted shifted as the money grew, and I wasn't paying enough attention to notice the shift until it had moved too far to come back from. We both made mistakes. The divorce was painful, and it was better than the alternative, which was staying in something that had already ended. He paused. Sophie sees her every other weekend. Rebecca loves Sophie. That part's not complicated. Lily nodded slowly. And the dating thing, she said. The disguise. How many women? He did not look away. 8 dates across a year and a half. None of them went past a third date. You're the first person I've... He stopped, recalibrated. This is the first time it's been real since the divorce. She held that for a moment. 8 dates, she said. 8 first impressions where I watched the same thing happen. He looked at the counter. I know how that sounds, like I was running a test on people. I don't love that about myself. But I was trying to find someone who would choose me before they knew the number, and instead I just... He exhaled slowly. I ended up not giving anyone the chance, including you, for too long. The kitchen was quiet. The December afternoon was going dark outside, the way December afternoons did, without ceremony. Sophie was somewhere in the back of the house, quiet for once, with the specific quietness of a child who was listening without listening. Lily looked at the kitchen around her, the good appliances, the clean lines of it, the quality of everything in a room that spoke without speaking about the life that existed here. Does Sophie know? She said. Since October, she figured it out. Something moved across Lily's face. She didn't tell me. No. She's 8. She keeps her own counsel, he said. I have no idea where she got that from. Another almost smile. This one lasted a half-second longer than the last. I want to meet your life, Lily said. Not the company, not the money, your life. I don't mean the revenue figures. I mean, I want you to stop managing what I see. I want the actual thing, even if some of it is complicated or ugly or not what I expected. Yes, he said, immediately, without hesitation. I mean it, Grayson. I've been the person on the outside of the picture before, and I'm telling you clearly, I can't be that again. If something's hard, I need to know. If work is bad, if something with Sophie is complicated, if there's something I should know about the business or your family or any of it, I need the door open. The door's open, he said. She looked at him, the look she gave things she was deciding whether to trust. Long and quiet and honest. Okay, she said. Okay? I'm still angry, she said. I want to be clear about that. I'm not done being angry, but... She pressed her palms flat on the counter again, then released them. I know who you are. I've known for 3 months, and the person I know is someone I... She stopped. I'm not ready to say the whole thing yet. But you know what I mean. He did know. He knew exactly. Yeah, he said. I know what you mean. She exhaled. Something in her shoulders released slightly. Not all the way, not the full release of tension that came from resolution, but the partial release of someone who had made a decision and was learning to live inside it. Can I see the house? She said. He looked at her. The real one, she said. Not the editing. I want to see where you actually live. He showed her. Not with a tour. He didn't narrate or explain or apologize for anything. He just walked her through it at a pace that let her look at what she wanted to look at. And she moved through the rooms with her characteristic attentiveness, taking in the details that accumulated into a life. The framed photos on the hallway wall, a younger Grayson with a much smaller Sophie, a construction site in the early years where he was clearly in the middle of physical work, a photo of him and Claire at what appeared to be someone's wedding. The bookshelf in the living room that had Sophie's books mixed with his without any attempt at organization, which she noted. The kitchen window with its view of the city, the same view he stood at in the dark at 5 a.m., which she stood at for a moment and looked at without saying anything. Sophie's room they passed without entering. Sophie's room was Sophie's, and he knocked and said, "We're walking by." And Sophie said, "Okay," from inside without opening the door, which was the correct call on everyone's part. His office she stopped in the doorway of. She looked at the whiteboard along one wall with its current project map, a visual he'd been using since the early years, markers in 4 colors, the logic of the work laid out spatially because that was how his brain processed it. The desk that was controlled chaos, which anyone who knew him understood was functional chaos rather than neglect. The small frame drawing on the shelf behind the desk, crayon, obviously Sophie's, obviously old, of 2 figures standing next to something that was either a building or a truck or possibly a dinosaur. It was genuinely hard to tell. "She drew that when she was 4, he said. "She told me it was a skyscraper. I have no idea if that's accurate." Lily looked at it for a moment. "It might be a dinosaur." "That's what I thought," she insists. She looked at the whiteboard, at the project map, at the structure of the work his mind built when it had something to organize. "You love it," she said, the same thing she'd said at the jazz bar 3 months ago. "Yeah," he said, "the same way you loved Carta, the same way you'd love the next one." She turned to look at him. Something in her face shifted. Not surprise exactly, but the reaction of someone who hadn't expected to be seen clearly in that particular moment. "The next one," she repeated. "You're going to open another restaurant," he said. "You've been working toward it since the first one closed. It's in everything you do at Lou's, like the way you pay attention to what works, what doesn't, how you treat the regulars, what makes people stay. You're not a waitress who wants to keep waiting tables. You're a restaurateur working a day job." She was quiet. "Was that too much?" he said. "No." She looked at the whiteboard. "No, it was accurate." A pause. "No one said that to me out loud before." "It's obvious." "Not to most people." He looked at her. "I pay attention." The words landed with a particular weight given the conversation they'd just come from. She heard it. He could see that she heard it. "You pay attention to the things you choose to pay attention to," she said, not accusatory, just precise. "Fair," he said. "Yes, fair." She leaned against the door frame. "I want to tell you something," she said. "Okay." "When I was watching that news clip at Lou's, before the shock of it, the first 2 seconds before I understood what I was seeing, I felt proud." She looked at him when she said it, holding his gaze. "I didn't know why. I just saw a man I knew on a news report and felt proud of him before I understood what any of it meant. And then the understanding hit, and the pride got buried under everything else." She paused. "But it was there first. I want you to know it was there first." He didn't have language for what that did. He stood in the doorway of his office in the December dark and looked at the woman leaning on the opposite side of the frame and understood that what he was feeling was not complicated at all. It was the simplest thing, actually. He just spent 3 years building walls around it. "Lily," he said. "Yeah. I'm going to say the thing I've been not saying for a while. Because you asked me to keep the door open, and this is the first one." She waited. "I love you," he said. I know the timing on it is not ideal. You're still angry, and you have every right to be. But you asked me for honesty, and this is the honest thing, and I'm done being careful with it." The hallway was quiet. From somewhere in the back of the house, distinctly and clearly, came the sound of Sophie's door opening approximately 6 inches. Neither of them acknowledged it. Lily looked at him for a long moment. Her face did the thing it did when she was concentrating on something that mattered. "I know," she said. "Not I love you too. Not yet. Something more measured and more honest for its measure. I know you do, and I—" She stopped. "I'm getting there. I want you to know I'm getting there." "That's enough," he said. "Don't say that if you don't mean it. I mean it. He looked at her steadily. That's enough. It's enough to work with. Sophie's door down the hall opened slightly further. Then a small voice said, with the transparent subtlety of an 8-year-old who had been eavesdropping without compunction, "Does anyone want hot chocolate? I can make hot chocolate." Lily pressed her lips together. Grayson closed his eyes briefly. "Sophie," he said. "I'm just offering," Sophie said from behind a door that was now approximately half open. "It's cold," and it seemed relevant. Lily laughed. The real one, slightly surprised by itself, coming from somewhere unguarded. The one Grayson had been collecting since September. "Yeah, okay," Lily said. "Hot chocolate sounds good." The door opened the rest of the way. Sophie emerged with the dignity of someone who had absolutely not been listening at a door and was simply offering beverages out of the goodness of her heart. She walked past them both toward the kitchen with the specific purposefulness of someone executing a plan. "I know the good packets," she informed them over her shoulder. "The ones with the tiny marshmallows. Not the big ones. Big ones have the wrong ratio." Grayson looked at Lily. Lily was still smiling. She looked back at him, and the smile had something behind it, warm and complicated and real. The tiredness of 2 days was still there, but it had changed quality, was no longer just weight, but something that had been carried through and come out the other side. "Come on," she said, and she pushed off the doorframe and walked toward the kitchen, and after a moment he followed. They sat at the kitchen island, Sophie on her bar stool, Lily in the seat that had become hers over several months without anyone officially assigning it, Grayson with his back to the counter because there was only so much counter seating and he was the one who could stand. Sophie made the hot chocolate with a level of ceremony appropriate to a surgical procedure, explaining the packet-to-milk ratio in detail, while Lily listened with her full face and her real attention. The December dark had settled outside the window. The city lights were doing their usual thing. This kitchen, this window, this specific arrangement of 3 people around a counter. Grayson looked at it and felt, for the first time in 3 days, something that was not waiting, something that was simply presence. The rare feeling of being exactly where you were supposed to be, doing what you were supposed to be doing, with no part of yourself somewhere else. It was imperfect. Lily was still angry, and she'd said so, and that was real, and it would take time. He had 3 months of debt to repay in the currency of consistency and open doors. Nothing was resolved in the way that resolutions were clean. There was still her parents to meet, still the full exposure of his actual life that she'd asked for, and that he'd have to learn to offer without self-editing. Still the work of it, which was different from the early months, but was not less. But Sophie was explaining hot chocolate ratios with the conviction of a person who had strong and evidence-based opinions about marshmallows. And Lily was asking follow-up questions in the tone of someone genuinely interested in the answer. And outside the window, the city was going about its business. And this, specifically this, was the thing he'd been trying to build for 3 years without knowing what it was supposed to look like. He picked up his mug when Sophie slid it across the counter. "Ratio's good," he said. Sophie looked satisfied. "I told you about the tiny marshmallows." "You did." "And information is valuable," Sophie said, "especially when people actually listen to it." She said it without looking at him, but he understood who she was talking about, and he understood it was aimed at him, and he accepted it the way he tried to accept everything that was true. "Yeah," he said. "It is." Lily glanced at him over her mug. A small look. Private. He looked back. Outside, the December rain had started again. The quiet kind. Not the storm that had torn through 3 weeks ago, but the steady, persistent kind that the city ran on, that got into the gutters and down the hills and into the bay. Inside, 3 people drank hot chocolate in a kitchen, and the hard conversation sat in the corners of the room, not threatening anymore, but simply present, the way hard things were when you'd looked at them directly and chosen to stay anyway. That was enough, Grayson thought. That was, for tonight, more than enough. The anger didn't leave all at once. Grayson had understood it wouldn't. He'd understood it the night Lily sat at his kitchen island and drank Sophie's hot chocolate and said, "I'm still angry," like a fact she was handing him to hold, and he'd taken it without argument because it was accurate, and because arguing with accurate things was something he'd mostly stopped doing in his 30s. What changed in the weeks after that night was the texture of it. The anger was still there, but it stopped being a wall and became more like weather. Present some days, absent others, occasionally arriving without warning in the middle of an ordinary moment and then passing through. He could see it in the way she sometimes went quiet mid-conversation, and he knew she'd landed on something adjacent to what he'd done. Some small reminder of the gap that had existed between what she knew and what was true. He never rushed her through those moments. He let them be what they were. She'd asked him to keep the door open, and he kept it open. That meant things that were new to him, things he hadn't practiced. It meant telling her when a project went wrong instead of managing his presentation of it. It meant the week in early January when the Hargrove project hit a subcontractor dispute that threatened to push the completion date by 6 weeks and cost him close to $400,000. He called her from the truck on the way home. Not to process it strategically, not because she had construction expertise, but because she'd asked to be inside the real life. And this was the real life. She'd listened. She'd asked 2 questions that were good questions. She hadn't tried to fix it. At the end, she'd said, "That sounds genuinely awful. I'm sorry." And he'd felt something in his chest unclench that he hadn't known was clenched. He told her about Rebecca, too. Not everything. There were things in that marriage that belonged to both of them and weren't his alone to share. But enough. The shape of how it had started and what it had been, and how it had ended. He told her about the specific afternoon he'd understood the marriage was over, which was not the afternoon of any fight, but a Tuesday in March 3 years ago, when he'd come home to find Rebecca had redecorated Sophie's bedroom without telling him, had replaced Sophie's drawings on the wall with something more aesthetically appropriate, and he'd stood in his daughter's room looking at the bare patch of wall where the crayon drawings had been and understood that he and his wife were no longer trying to build the same thing. Lily had listened to this without interrupting. "She's not a bad person," he said. "I want to be clear about that. You've said that twice now." "Because I mean it twice." "I know you do." She looked at him. "That actually says something about you. That you mean it." He hadn't thought of it that way. He filed it. Her parents arrived the 3rd weekend of January. Tom and Carol Carter drove down from Portland in a 12-year-old Subaru with a cracked passenger mirror and a bumper sticker from a state park Lily had mentioned visiting once as a child. They were the kind of people who took up exactly the right amount of space, warm without being overwhelming, curious without being invasive. Tom was a retired high school history teacher who had the particular quality of someone accustomed to listening to young people and taking them seriously. Carol had the same dark hair as Lily and the same habit of going still when she was thinking hard about something. They met at a restaurant Lily had chosen. Not Lou's, somewhere neutral, a farm-to-table place in the inner Sunset that Grayson had never been to, and which he understood was a deliberate leveling choice on Lily's part. He came in the truck. He did not wear the flannel shirt because that version of things was done, but he wore what he actually wore: dark jeans, a good sweater, nothing that announced anything. He arrived 3 minutes early and stood at the bar and was studying the wine list when the Carters came in. Tom shook his hand with the handshake of a man who had been shaking hands for decades and had opinions about what they communicated. He looked at Grayson with a directness that was not unfriendly, but was clearly evaluative, the look of a father who had lent his daughter money for a failed restaurant and watched her rebuild herself without complaint, and was not going to be casual about who she spent her time with. "Lily's told us about you," Tom said. "Good things, I hope," Grayson said. "Mostly," Tom said. His expression didn't change. "She also told us about the situation with the company." Grayson held his gaze. "I know." "We'll get to that," Tom said. Not threatening, just honest. "Let's eat first." They ate first. Carol was easier. She asked about Sophie within the first 10 minutes with the genuine interest of someone who liked children and didn't pretend otherwise. And Grayson talked about Sophie the way he always talked about Sophie, which was without editing, and he could see Carol filing things with the same attentiveness Lily had. Lily sat between her parents and across from Grayson, and was, he noticed, watching all of them simultaneously, in the way she watched the floor at Lou's. Peripheral, total. Halfway through dinner, Tom set down his fork. "The money thing," he said. Lily said, "Dad." "She doesn't mind," Tom said, meaning Lily, not asking. "We've talked about it. I want to hear it from you." Grayson put his own fork down. I hid the scale of my company from your daughter for 3 months. I did it deliberately, for reasons that made sense to me, and it was still wrong. She deserved honesty from the beginning, and I didn't give it to her. I'm not going to dress that up. Tom looked at him. That's it? Tom said. That's the honest version, Grayson said. I could give you the longer version with more context, but the context doesn't change the core of it. A pause. Lily said you were at that job site all night, Tom said. The flooding. Yes. In the rain. Yes. Tom picked his fork back up. Okay, he said. He resumed eating. Lily looked at her father. That's it? Okay. I'm not interviewing him, Lily. I'm getting a sense of him. Tom speared a piece of roasted carrot. I have a sense of him. Carol was looking at her water glass with the very specific expression of a woman who had been married to this man for a long time and had learned to let him arrive at things in his own sequence. After dinner, when Lily and Carol were in the restroom and Grayson was settling the check, he'd insisted and Tom had accepted without performing reluctance, which Grayson respected. Tom sat back in his chair and looked at him with a more direct version of the look he'd been using all evening. She's been rebuilding for 2 years, Tom said. The restaurant took everything she had. We gave her what we could and she paid it back before we ever asked her to, which is the kind of person she is. He looked at the table. She doesn't need you to fix anything. She doesn't need the money. I want to be clear about that. I know, Grayson said. She needs someone who actually sees her. Tom looked up. Her restaurant wasn't a failure. It was bad timing and a bad street. She built a good thing. The context just wasn't right for it. Most people who looked at what happened saw a failure. She saw a lesson. He paused. Do you understand what I'm telling you? That she's going to try again, Grayson said. When she's ready. And I need to know that whoever is in her life when that happens is going to stand next to her, not in front of her. Tom held his gaze. Not fund it for her, not manage it, stand next to her. Yes, Grayson said. I understand that. Tom nodded once. Good. He picked up his water glass. The truck is very old, by the way. I know. Does it run? Reliably. Tom said, and Lily and Carol reappeared from across the restaurant, and the conversation moved on. He drove home that night feeling something he identified after a moment of examination as having been assessed honestly and come out okay. Not celebrated, not approved of as an acquisition, just seen clearly by people who loved Lily and trusted their own read of things. It was, he thought, the most straightforwardly adult interaction he'd had with a romantic partner's family, and there was something clean about it. Sophie asked for a full debrief when he got home. Did her dad like you? She said from the couch where she was supposedly doing homework. Define like. Did he shake your hand like he meant it? Yes. Did her mom ask about me? First 10 minutes. Sophie nodded with the satisfaction of someone whose intelligence operation was yielding results. Good. February came and something shifted. Not dramatically. The shift was in the quality of ordinary time. The Thursday dinners that had resumed, the Saturday lunches at Lou's that had always continued because Sophie would not have accepted their cancellation, the Sunday afternoon in the middle of the month when Lily came over because it was raining and there was nothing specific planned, and they sat in the kitchen with coffee and the paper, an actual physical newspaper Grayson still had delivered because some habits were structural, and divided it into sections the way people did when they'd been doing something long enough to have a system. Sophie was drawing at the kitchen island. The radio was on low. Outside, the rain was doing its ordinary thing. Lily looked up from the art section at one point and said, There's a vacant space on Valencia Street. Mixed-use building, ground floor commercial. It's been empty for 8 months. Grayson looked up from the business section. She was looking at the paper, not at him. I'm not saying anything. I just noticed it. How big? Article says 1,200 square feet. She turned the page. Which is smaller than Carta was, but smaller might be smarter to start. He looked at her profile. The particular quality of concentration that meant she was actually thinking about this, not just mentioning it. Is there a picture? He said. She turned the paper and slid it across to him. He looked at the photo. A corner unit, good natural light from the look of it, the building in decent condition. Valencia Street was foot traffic and neighborhood loyalty. The kind of street that rewarded consistency. "It's a good location," he said. She took the paper back. "I know." He didn't say anything else. He understood the geometry of this moment, that she wasn't asking for funding or a partner or a plan. She was thinking out loud in the presence of someone she trusted with the unfinished thought. He understood what that meant and what it required of him, which was to be present without leaning in. He returned to his section of the paper. Sophie looked up from her drawing. "Is this about the restaurant?" she said. "Sophie," Grayson said, "I was just asking." "We're reading," he said. Sophie looked at Lily. Lily looked at Sophie. Something passed between them. The particular frequency of two people who understood each other outside the third person in the room. "You should do it," Sophie said. "You made good soup." Lily smiled. "I made one good soup. You tried it once." "Consistent quality in a sample is still quality," Sophie said, and went back to her drawing. Grayson put the paper down and looked at his daughter. "Where do you get this stuff?" he said. "I told you," she said. "I observe." The Pierce Construction Company Family Celebration was an annual event that Grayson had started in the third year of the company when it was still small enough that annual felt meaningful and not logistical. It had grown as the company grew. Now it filled a rented venue in the Mission, spanned an afternoon into an evening, and included families, which meant children and spouses and parents of employees who had been with him long enough that their people had become familiar faces at the annual table. He invited Lily in March, 2 weeks before the event, over dinner at her apartment. The first time he'd been to her apartment, which she'd let happen gradually, in the way she let things happen, and which was the 4th floor of the building with the part-time elevator and was exactly what he'd imagined. Small, clean, organized around the logic of her rather than any aesthetic plan, with a shelf of cookbooks that had the worn spines of actual use and a window over the alley that she'd made something of with plants. "It's a company thing," he said. "Employees and their families. I want you to come." She looked at him across her small kitchen table. "Why?" "Because it's part of the real life," he said. "You asked me to stop managing what you see. This is part of it." She considered this. "Is it going to be—" She stopped. "Are people going to know who I am? What I am to you?" "Daniel knows. A few other people know I've been seeing someone. It won't be a production." He paused. "But yes, people will understand you're there with me." She looked at the table. "Okay," she said. "Okay." I said okay. She stood and took her plate to the sink. "What do I wear?" The event was on a Saturday in late March, and the day was the kind of early spring day that the city occasionally produced as if to prove it was capable. Clear, cold, with the specific light that made everything look like a photograph of itself. Lily wore a blue dress, different from the one she'd worn to the wine bar in September, but the same quality of choice, care without effort, or effort that looked like none. She was quiet in the truck on the way over. Not anxious exactly. Thoughtful. "Tell me who I'm going to meet," she said. So he told her. Daniel, who she'd heard about enough to have a preliminary read on. Reyes, who had been on the night of the storm, and who she'd have context for. The woman who ran HR, Patricia, who had been with the company since year 2, and who had opinions about everything and no compunction about sharing them. The Guzman family, a crew foreman named Eddie and his wife and 3 kids, one of whom had a science fair project that Sophie had been corresponding with by email for 2 months, because Sophie had seen a photo of it and declared the methodology interesting. The older electrician, a man named Frank, who had worked for Pierce Construction for 6 years and who Grayson trusted with anything structural, and who was, as a human being, almost completely without artifice. Lily listened. She asked questions. By the time they arrived, she had a working map of the room before she walked into it. She was good at rooms. He watched her work the space the way he'd watched her work lose. Not performing, not managing, just genuinely present with people. She talked to Patricia for 20 minutes, which was longer than most new people survived Patricia's conversational intensity, and came away from it with the expression of someone who'd found the experience interesting. She crouched down to talk to Eddie's youngest kid, who was 4 and had cornered a corner of the venue for reasons unclear, and she talked to him at his level with the same quality of attention she'd always given Sophie. She found Frank at the food table, and somehow within 10 minutes they were deep in a conversation about structural integrity that Grayson could hear fragments of across the room, and which Frank was clearly enjoying in the way he enjoyed conversations with people who actually knew something. Daniel appeared at Grayson's shoulder. "She's good," Daniel said. "I know. Patricia likes her." "That's—" Grayson looked at him. "Patricia likes her?" 20 minutes, Daniel said. Uninterrupted. Patricia hasn't given 20 uninterrupted minutes to anyone since 2019. He picked up his drink. "She's good, Gray." Grayson watched Lily make her way back from Frank with a plate of food, and the look of someone who had found the evening more genuinely interesting than she'd expected. She found him at the edge of the room and stood next to him and surveyed the space with a different quality than she'd had when they arrived. "These people have been with you a long time," she said. "A lot of them. Frank's been here 6 years, Patricia 8, the Guzman guy, Eddie, 4 years. They're not— It doesn't feel like a company thing." She tilted her head slightly. "I've been to company things. They have a specific feeling, like everyone's doing a performance of being colleagues. This doesn't feel like that." "No," he said. "Why not?" He thought about how to answer this. "Because they know they can leave if they want to," he said. "I've had people leave. It happens. But the ones who stay, they stay because the work is real and the pay is fair and nobody's pretending things are different than they are. I don't know how to run it any other way." She looked at him sideways. "And yet," he understood what she meant. "The work side of it," he said. "I know how to be honest about the work. The personal stuff—" He paused. "The personal stuff I've been worse at." "Yeah," she said. "Not brutal, just accurate." "I know." She looked back at the room, at Reyes, who was deep in conversation with 2 other crew members about something that involved animated hand gestures, at Sophie, who had found Eddie's children and was apparently running something that involved a relay race around the edge of the venue, at Daniel, who was watching Sophie with the expression of a man who had forgotten that children operated this way. "You built this," Lily said. "The company, not just the company." She turned to look at him. These people, their families, the fact that Frank can tell a stranger about load-bearing walls for 20 minutes at a party because he genuinely loves what he does, and working here has given him space to love it. She paused. "That's not a revenue figure. That's something else." He looked at the room. He saw it the way she was describing it, not the way he usually saw it, which was operationally, functionally through the lens of what needed attention, but as a thing that existed and had weight and meant something outside of what it produced. "I don't think about it that way very often," he said. "I know you don't," she said. "That's why I'm saying it." Sophie appeared from across the room at a full sprint, her dress already somewhat disheveled, carrying what appeared to be a handmade ribbon that Eddie's kids had fashioned from a paper table runner. "Lily," she said, breathing hard, "we need a judge. For the races. You have to be impartial because Daddy always lets me win." "I don't let you win," Grayson said. "You absolutely let me win," Sophie said with the certainty of someone who had data. She grabbed Lily's hand. "Come on, we need impartiality." Lily looked at Grayson. He shrugged the shrug of a man who had learned that Sophie's operational plans did not actually require consent. "Go," he said. She let Sophie pull her across the room. He watched her go. He watched her be installed as race judge by 4 children who were apparently serious about the integrity of the process. He watched her stand at the finish line with her arms crossed and her head tilted with the expression of someone genuinely invested in the outcome. Daniel reappeared. "Sophie likes her," Daniel said. "Sophie's always liked her, since the soup review. Sophie's judgment is better than yours. Sophie is 8. Sophie's judgment is still better than yours," Daniel said, and walked away. Grayson stood at the edge of the room and watched the spring evening do its thing, and thought about the specific trajectory of the last 7 months. The Saturday at Lou's in September when Sophie had ordered the bisque and declared it smooth but meaningful. The blind date at the wine bar where Lily had walked in and he'd recognized her before she recognized him and felt the particular pull of something he didn't immediately have language for. The Thursday dinners and the November rain and the winter carnival and the jazz bar where she'd said something real and meant it. The flannel shirt and the F-150 and 3 months of careful, deliberate omission. The news clip and the corner table at Lou's, and I felt like an idiot. And that was you, not the shirt. Hot chocolate with tiny marshmallows, and 2 days of silence and one line of text, and her sitting at his kitchen island saying, "I'm getting there." Tom Carter across a dinner table saying, "Stand next to her, not in front of her." The Valencia street space in the arts section of the paper on a rainy Sunday. He looked at Lily across the room, mock seriously adjudicating a foot race between 4 children who were approximately vibrating with competitive energy, and he thought about what Tom had said. She doesn't need you to fix anything. She needs someone who sees her. He saw her. He'd seen her since September, across a diner counter with flour on her forearm and an ink stain on her hand and the particular attentiveness of someone who cared about the work in front of her. He'd been trying, imperfectly and not always honestly, to be worth being seen back. He was going to keep trying. The evening wound down the way good evenings wound down, not with a clean ending but with a gradual loosening. People saying goodbyes in ones and twos, children running out of fuel and becoming quiet, the venue taking on the particular atmosphere of a space that had held something good and was releasing it back into the world. On the drive home, Sophie was in the back seat with the paper ribbon around her neck like a medal, which Eddie's youngest had apparently awarded to her as chief race official, which was either Sophie's doing or a natural outcome. She was tired in the specific way that children got tired after social events, not cranky, just down from the high of it. She was quiet for about 10 minutes. Then she said, from the back seat, into the dark of the truck, "Lily." Lily turned around in the passenger seat. "Yeah?" Sophie looked at her with the directness she applied to things that mattered. "I knew, since the beginning, that you liked us and not the money." She said it matter-of-factly. "I just wanted you to know that I knew." Lily was quiet for a moment. "Yeah," she said. "You sat down and listened to my soup review," Sophie said. "Nobody does that if they're performing. You actually wanted to hear it." She settled back in her seat. "I'm observant," she added. Lily turned back to face the front. She looked at the windshield for a moment, at the city streets moving through the truck's headlights. Grayson didn't say anything. Some things deserved the space to settle. They pulled into his driveway. Sophie extracted herself from the back seat with the ribbon still around her neck and headed for the front door with the efficiency of someone running on reserve power. Grayson and Lily sat in the truck for a moment in the way they sometimes did, not because either of them had something specific to say, but because the transition from the evening to whatever came next deserved a pause. "She's something," Lily said. "She's the best person I know," he said. "And I know a lot of people." Lily looked at the house, at the light Sophie had turned on inside, visible through the window. She looked at it for a long moment. "I've been thinking about the Valencia Street space," she said. He waited. "Not asking you for anything," she said immediately. "That's not... I want to be clear about that." "I know," he said. "I've been running numbers. My numbers, what I've saved, what I'd need to start small. What small actually looks like." She turned to look at him. "And I think I'm closer than I thought. Not tomorrow, but this year maybe. Late this year." He looked at her in the dashboard light. "What kind of food?" She blinked. Then, "What?" "What kind of food for the restaurant?" "You've never said specifically." She looked at him for a moment. "You're not going to say anything about the numbers? Or whether it's a good idea? Or, it's your restaurant," he said. "I trust your read on the numbers. I trust your read on the idea. I've watched you work for 7 months, and I know what you see and what you miss. And you don't miss the things that matter." He held her gaze. "What kind of food?" She looked at the windshield, the small smile that was not quite a smile. "Seasonal," she said. "Simple, the kind of menu that changes based on what's actually good that week, not what's engineered to be consistent." She paused. "Small menu, 8 to 10 items. No architectural food, nothing that has to be explained. Just real food, done well, in a room where people want to stay." "That's a good restaurant," he said. "I know it is." She turned to look at him. "I knew it was the first time too. I just didn't have the right street." A pause. Valencia is a good street. Valencia is a great street, he said. She looked at him. The look she gave things she was deciding whether to trust, and then something in it shifted. Not dramatically, not the way shifts announce themselves in stories, but the way they happened in actual life, quietly and without signal, one quality of expression becoming another. I love you, she said. The words landed in the specific silence of a truck cab in a driveway in late March, with the house light on inside, and Sophie's ribbon presumably still in her possession, and the spring night doing its cool and indifferent thing outside the windows. He looked at her. Yeah? He said. Don't make me say it twice, she said. I'm not... I just... He stopped. He was smiling. He couldn't help it and didn't try. I'm just making sure I heard it right. You heard it right. She looked at the dashboard. It took me a while. I'm aware of that. You needed time. It was legitimate. It was also... She stopped. I was protecting myself, which is fair, but at some point protecting yourself becomes just not letting things happen. And I decided I was done not letting this happen. He thought about that, about the specific decision she was describing, not the feeling, but the choice to act on it. He understood the distinction. He'd been slow to make the same one. I should have told you sooner, he said, about the company. I know that. And I know saying I know it doesn't undo it. He looked at her. But I need you to know that it was never, you were never a test. You were never someone I was managing. I was afraid and I handled the fear badly, and that's the whole truth of it. She nodded. I know, she said. I knew in October, I think. I just had to be angry about it for a while before I could know it clearly. That's fair, he said. It's also just human, she said. People are complicated and they do things badly and then they try to do them better. That's the whole story, mostly. He looked at her in the dashboard light and thought about the specific truth of that, about how the version of his life he'd been most afraid to show her, the full dimensions of it, had turned out to be less significant than the version of himself he'd been most afraid to offer. The truck and the flannel shirt had been easier to risk than the actual man inside them, and she had found the man first, through a soup review and a rainy drive and Thursday dinners and a winter carnival, and she'd decided he was worth the rest of it. He reached across and took her hand. She didn't pull back. Her hand in his had the specific weight of something chosen. Okay, he said. Okay? She looked at him sideways. I'm not doing the thing where I come up with the right words, he said. I love you. You love me. Sophie loves you and you love Sophie, and you're going to open a restaurant on Valencia Street, and it's going to be exactly what you described, and people are going to want to stay. He paused. That's where we are. I don't need to make it more complicated than that. She was quiet for a moment. Your daughter told me I liked you before I knew you were rich, she said. She's perceptive. She's terrifying. I've been saying that for years. Lily looked at the house. Through the window, they could see Sophie's shadow moving through the lit room, still apparently wearing the ribbon. She's the best part of this, Lily said. I want you to know that. Not the only part, but the best one. He looked at his daughter's shadow moving through the light of the house he'd built, in the life he'd made, on the other side of the window from where he sat in his 25-year-old truck, with the woman who had never once asked him to be larger than he was, or smaller than he was, who had simply asked him to be honest and had meant it in both directions. Yeah, he said. She is. They went inside. The kitchen was the kitchen it always was, the window with the city lights, the island with the bar stool, the coffee maker and the good knife set, and the refrigerator with Sophie's drawings on it, the crayon skyscraper or dinosaur held up by a magnet that Sophie had picked out of a hardware store bin because it was shaped like a wrench. The small accumulated geography of a life that was, in its particulars, nothing extraordinary, and in its entirety, everything. Sophie was at the island with a glass of water and the race ribbon and her purple notebook, writing something. She looked up when they came in, assessed the room in her instantaneous way, and apparently concluded what she needed to conclude, because she said nothing and went back to writing. Lily sat down at the island. Grayson made coffee, late for coffee, but some habits didn't check the time. Sophie pushed her notebook across to Lily without looking up. What's this? Lily said. New review, Sophie said, of tonight's food. Lily looked at the notebook. Read for a moment. The handwriting was Sophie's, but large, careful, opinionated. You rated the mini quiches a 7, Lily said. The pastry was underdone, Sophie said. I noted that. You noted it in detail. I'm thorough, Sophie said. Lily looked at the notebook for another moment, then she slid it back. The observations section is very good, she said. Your prose is improving. Sophie looked up with the specific expression she wore when she'd been paid a real compliment versus a performative one. She could always tell the difference. Thank you, she said, meaning it. Grayson set a mug in front of Lily. She wrapped both hands around it. Her hands, the way she held things, the specific gesture he'd been watching for 7 months, and would, he understood now, be watching for a long time after. The city outside the window was doing what it always did. The lights were indifferent and continuous. The rain had held off tonight. The three of them sat in the kitchen. Sophie writing, Lily reading what Sophie wrote, Grayson with his coffee at the counter. And the house held it all the way houses did when they were actually lived in, when the life inside them was real enough to leave marks on the walls. This was the thing, Grayson thought. Not the company, and not the money, and not the board meetings, or the contract wins, or the revenue figures that Daniel tracked in quarterly reports. Not the truck, and not the flannel shirt, and not the system of cautious concealment he'd built to protect himself from the specific disappointment of being chosen for the wrong reasons. This, a kitchen at night with coffee going cold, and a purple notebook full of restaurant reviews, and an 8-year-old who observed everything and said so. And a woman who had sat across from him 7 months ago and listened to his daughter discuss soup texture as if it were the most interesting thing she'd heard all week, because it genuinely was. He had built a lot of things in his life. He had built them carefully, with attention to foundation and structure and the slow, honest work of things meant to last. This was the best thing. Not because it was finished. It wasn't. Nothing real was ever finished. There would be Lily's anger, still present in the margins sometimes, working itself out over time. There would be the restaurant on Valencia Street and all the risk and work and fear that would come with it, and he would stand next to her through that because Tom Carter had asked him to and because it was the only position that made sense. There would be harder seasons with Sophie as she got older, as she understood more about the divorce and the years before it, and what her parents had been to each other and what they'd stopped being. There would be the ordinary difficulty of two people who had both been hurt trying to trust each other with their unfinished parts. It would not be smooth. He had stopped expecting smooth sometime in his early 30s and had been, on the whole, better for it. But it would be real. That was the word that mattered, the word Lily had used on a third date at a jazz bar in October, the word that had carried all the weight of what she meant without requiring more explanation, because they were both people who understood what the alternative cost. Something real. He had it. They had it. However imperfectly and impermanently and in need of tending, they had it. Sophie capped her pen and closed the purple notebook. She looked at her father and then at Lily with the unhurried expression of someone who had been waiting a long time for an outcome she considered correct and was now satisfied to be in its presence. Okay, she said. I'm going to bed. Good night, Grayson said. She slid off the bar stool, walked around the island, stopped next to Lily. She put her hand briefly on Lily's arm. Not a hug, not a performance of affection, just a hand placed deliberately for exactly 3 seconds. Then she removed it and walked down the hall and her bedroom door clicked shut. Lily looked at her arm, then at Grayson. He didn't say anything. Some things didn't need the words. Outside the kitchen window, the city did its slow and continuous thing, and inside the coffee cooled and the lights stayed on, and the life that Grayson Pierce had spent 3 careful years trying to protect was finally, quietly, entirely visible. And it was enough. It was more than enough. It was in the specific and unglamorous and permanent way of things that were genuinely earned, everything.